Marineford was one of the most legendary battles in One Piece history, a war that changed everything. But what if this was the day not where Luffy tried to save everyone, but where he learned to use everyone? Picture it, the Moby Dick rising from beneath the sea, Whitebeard standing like a mountain, the execution platform towering over Marines and pirates alike. In the original timeline, Luffy crashes from the sky, chains flying, screaming Ace's name with zero plan and a ton of heart. But in this timeline, when he hits the ground, something else lands with him. A decision to become Pirate King no matter who burns for it. Here's the kicker. Luffy keeps the same dream, the same goal, the same words Roger once carried. But what if he added Blackbeard's ambition, Blackbeard's patience, Blackbeard's ruthless opportunism? Instead of a reckless little brother charging the front lines, you see a Luffy who looks at Marineford the way Teach did, as a once-in-a-lifetime stage to build an empire in one afternoon. So suddenly, every iconic moment twists. The prison break crew doesn't just rush forward, they're assets on a board. Crocodile isn't a wild card, he's a contract. Buggy isn't comic relief, he's a walking camera broadcasting Luffy's new legend to the entire world. In the original timeline, Luffy trusted anyone who'd help him reach Ace. But in this timeline, he's the one offering deals, promising chaos, territory, and future favors, already planning how to break those promises when they stop being useful. What if nameless allies aren't comrades, but pawns? Fodder pirates become human shields. When giants and New World captains are thrown into the meat grinder to open paths, while Luffy hangs back just long enough to read the battlefield, not just feel it. Does he still scream for Ace? Of course. But now he's also watching the admirals, the warlords, the falling bodies, and the devil fruits waiting to be claimed. Because remember what Blackbeard did here. He waited decades on Whitebeard's crew just to steal the Yami Nami, then walked into Marineford and turned a dying legend into his stepping stone. So what if Luffy, in the same war, starts eyeing powers the same way? Ace's Mera no Mi, Whitebeard's Gura no Mi, even the fruits of fallen warlords. What if Ace's execution isn't just a tragedy to stop, but a potential spark to ignite his own era? Now the stakes explode. If the Straw Hat flag turns black in the hearts of the world, if the symbol of freedom becomes the symbol of fear, then the balance between Yonko, Marines, and revolutionaries doesn't just tilt, it shatters. What does Pirate King even mean when the man chasing it is willing to manipulate Dragon, outplay Shanks, and steal Blackbeard's role as the ultimate Shadow Emperor? That's the timeline we're diving into. We're going to rewrite Marineford from the ground up, then follow this darker Luffy through the time skip, the New World, and all the way to the final war. At every step we'll ask, is he still a hero? Or did Marineford create the most dangerous pirate alive? Let's dive into the moment everything changed. Defining a Blackbeard Luffy. Ambition without the smile. So before we rewrite Marineford, we need to lock in who this darker Luffy actually is. What does it really mean for Luffy to become like Blackbeard? Because if we don't define that now, the whole timeline falls apart later. Let's start with Blackbeard himself. This is a man who waited decades on Whitebeard's ship, hiding in plain sight, just for one devil fruit. No glory, no spotlight, just quiet patience. He only moved when the Yami no Mi finally appeared. That's not luck, that's long-term obsession. Then, when he did act, he struck Thatch, betrayed Whitebeard, handed Ace to the Marines, and walked into Impel Down and Marineford, only when the odds were stacked in his favor. You see, Blackbeard doesn't fight fair. He doesn't care about honor, he cares about winning. He'll sacrifice anyone. Thatch, his old crew, nameless prisoners, even his own allies are just tools on the board. He times his entrances for maximum impact. Impel Down after the chaos starts, Marineford after everyone's exhausted, Whitebeard after he's half dead. That's Blackbeard's core. Patience, opportunism, and ruthless calculation. Now contrast that with Luffy. In the original timeline, Luffy is the opposite kind of storm. He charges, he screams, he punches whoever's in front of him. He's impulsive and emotionally driven, allergic to planning, and half the time his strategy is just yelling, "I'm gonna save Ace," and running straight at the execution platform. But what if we look closer? This same Luffy can be temporarily pragmatic. He allies with Law at Punk Hazard, teams up with Beige to assassinate Big Mom, and even fights alongside Crocodile and Buggy at Marineford when it serves his immediate goal. So in this timeline, we blend those two. Luffy keeps his hatred of outright cruelty. He still wants freedom, still wants to become Pirate King, still laughs, still loves meat and his crew, but he drops his refusal to use people. He becomes willing to manipulate, threaten, and bargain like Blackbeard, while still aiming to topple the world government. He'll promise Buggy glory he never intends to deliver. He'll let Crocodile loose on Marineford because chaos benefits him. Here's the kicker. He still has moral lines. He's not Doflamingo. He won't torture innocents for fun, he won't slaughter villages just to prove a point, and he won't betray his core crew. But nameless pirates dying as distractions? He accepts it. Extorting a corrupt king for territory? He does it. Weaponizing his reputation so enemies surrender in fear before he even throws a punch? That becomes part of the plan. Why does this matter for Marineford? Because the war stops being a one-note rescue mission and becomes a once-in-a-lifetime chessboard. Admirals, warlords, Yonko commanders, even the giants and pacifistas, every faction becomes a piece Luffy can move, trick, or sacrifice. He's not just trying to reach Ace. He's using the chaos to carve out his own rise. So how does a Luffy like that act the moment he steps onto the scaffold of history? Choosing the divergence, the one moment that warps Luffy's path. So when we ask how Luffy ends up acting like Blackbeard at Marineford, we need to rewind to the moment the splinter went into his brain. And that splinter has a name, Marshall D. Teach. Back in Impel Down, everything is already off the rails. Luffy's charging through the prison, breaking levels, freeing legends. Then Blackbeard appears. In the original timeline, it's pure rage. Luffy sees the man who captured Ace, swings on him, and Blackbeard just tanks it, laughing. He talks about dreams never dying, about the age of pirates, about how this chaos is exactly what he wanted. Luffy hates every word. But what if, in this timeline, Luffy doesn't just hate him? What if he actually registers what's happening? You see, Blackbeard walks into the world's strongest prison with a plan, uses the chaos Luffy created, and walks out with a custom-made army of monsters. Shiryu, Katarina Devon, San Juan Wolf, Teach turns Luffy's reckless jailbreak into his recruitment drive. Luffy watches that. He sees Blackbeard steal the spotlight of his own rampage. Here's the kicker. That's not the first wound. The real scar starts at Sabaody. Luffy punching a celestial dragon and then getting crushed for it. Kizaru toying with the supernovas. Kuma erasing the crew one by one while Luffy screams on his knees. That wasn't just a loss. It was proof that being brave and honest and loud wasn't enough. He was too weak, too naive, too easy to break. So now stack them. Sabaody's helplessness and Impel Down's humiliation. In this timeline, those two traumas fuse into something dangerous. Luffy doesn't have the words for it, but he feels it. If he walks into another battlefield like that, his crew dies. Ace dies. Everyone he loves disappears again. So when he's launched toward Marineford, and he's not just the idiot hero yelling for his brother, he's carrying a hidden terror. What if Sabaody repeats itself? What if his honesty and straightforward charges get Ace killed the same way they cost him his crew? And right behind that fear is Blackbeard's shadow, this living example that you can bend the world if you're willing to use people, to weaponize chaos instead of just surviving it. In the original timeline, Luffy stumbles through Marineford on raw emotion. But in this timeline, somewhere deep down, he's ready to copy whatever works. If Blackbeard can turn a prison into an army, why can't Luffy turn a war into a ladder? Why can't he push Crocodile, Buggy, even the giants and warlords into positions that benefit him and Ace? He doesn't wake up a villain. Not yet, ladies and gentlemen. And he storms Marineford as the same rubber idiot we love. Laughing, bleeding, screaming for Ace. But there's a crack in his ideals now. A tiny line where save everyone can quietly become use everyone if it means saving Ace. And once the first body drops in this war, that crack is about to shatter wide open. So when the drums of war start pounding and the first admiral stands in his way, which voice is Luffy really going to follow? Rebuilding Marineford, the baseline war before it breaks. So to feel how hard this is about to snap, we need to rebuild the battlefield exactly as it was. No shortcuts, no mercy. Marineford, reset. In the original timeline, Luffy crashes into the war on Hancock's ship, launched like a cannonball straight from Impel Down. You see Buggy filming himself, Crocodile glaring, Jinbei focused, Ivankov hyped, and all jammed onto that single deck as the three admirals sit calmly on the execution platform. Aokiji, Kizaru, Akainu, like executioner gods waiting for the storm to reach them. Above them, Sengoku and Garp stand over Ace. The chains, the sea stone cuffs, the clock ticking down. Whitebeard's fleet surrounds Marineford, and then it happens. The old man steps forward, cracks the air itself with the Gura Gura no Mi, and literally tilts the sea. That quake is a declaration. This is a war against the entire world government. From there, chaos explodes. Pacifistas march in like metal grim reapers. The warlords scatter across the battlefield. Mihawk tests the distance between himself and the Pirate King by firing a slash at Luffy. Doflamingo plays puppet master. Kuma is silent and terrifying. Hancock is secretly sniping Marines to protect Luffy. It's a full-blown monster showcase, and our rubber idiot is right in the middle of it. But watch how he moves. Luffy doesn't hang back. He doesn't think. He sprints straight at the platform, screaming Ace's name again and again. Every charge is reckless. Every path is a death route. And yet, in the original timeline, the universe keeps catching him. Crocodile suddenly saves Luffy from Mihawk's killing blow. Buggy accidentally intercepts attacks and, thanks to those Den Den Mushi cameras, instantly becomes a legend to everyone watching. Luffy collapses from exhaustion, then gets back up, then collapses again. Allies throw their bodies in front of him. Whitebeard's commanders, Jinbei, Ivankov, even Mr. At one point, this whole war bends around keeping that one idiot moving just a few meters closer to Ace. It's plot armor as a battlefield tactic. Here's the kicker. While all this is happening, another predator is watching from the shadows. Blackbeard. In the original timeline, he doesn't crash the party early. He waits. He lets Whitebeard bleed out against Marines and Admirals. Only when the old man is on his last legs does Teach arrive with his crew, finish him off, steal the Gura Gura no Mi, and declare a new era. That's opportunism weaponized. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our benchmark. This is the war exactly as it was, right up until Luffy reaches the execution platform and slams into the full weight of Marineford's defenses. Garp, Sengoku, the Admirals, the entire system in one wall. In this timeline, that's the pressure cooker, where Luffy's tiny crack finally breaks. So when that fist cocks back and the cannons all turn on him, does he charge like before, or does he start playing Marineford the way Blackbeard did? The first dark choice. Luffy uses fodder as shields. He doesn't charge like before. Under that rain of cannon fire, Luffy hesitates for half a heartbeat, not out of fear, but because Sabaody slams into his brain like a bullet. The Celestial Dragon, Kizaru's Light, his crew getting wiped because he stood in the open and took everything himself. And in this timeline, that memory twists into something darker. In the original timeline, Luffy just zigzags, tanks hits, screams apologies when other pirates get blasted trying to help him. He's chaos with a heart. But what if, right here, he decides chaos is a weapon? What if he decides other people can be armor? As he sprints toward the platform, he suddenly stops running in empty lanes. Instead, he dives into the thickest clusters of pirates. Whitebeard remnants, impel down escapees, random no-name crews. He weaves through them on purpose. You see Marines lining up shots, then hesitating because there are too many bodies in the way. A cannon blast rips through a giant behind him instead of his back. Luffy doesn't look back. He just keeps moving. Kizaru appears above, turning the sky into a glittering execution ground. Light bullets rain down. In the original timeline, Luffy would just eat the damage or pray someone like Marco covers him. But in this timeline, something else happens. A beam flashes straight for his chest. There's no time to dodge clean. Luffy's hand shoots out on instinct. He grabs a random pirate by the collar, some guy screaming about following Whitebeard to the end, and yanks him into the path of the light. The beam punches straight through that man's torso. The body jerks, smokes, collapses. For a split second, Luffy's eyes widen. He actually stops. His brain screams, "What did I just do?" But Ace is on that platform, the Admirals are in front of him, and that hesitation dies faster than the man at his feet. He bites down, says nothing, and rockets forward. If I stop, Ace dies. If they die instead, Ace lives. That's the equation now. Brutal, simple, effective. Ivankov sees it from the corner of the battlefield. Those giant eyes bulge even wider. This isn't the reckless, bleeding heart kid from Impel Down. Jinbei notices too. Sees his gaze sharpening as another volley gets redirected because Luffy ducks behind a cluster of pirates. They exchange a look. Uneasy, heavy. They need Luffy to reach Ace. But what is he turning into to get there? Buggy, clinging to his accidental fan base, watches a marine volley shred a group Luffy just ran through. He's horrified, shouting about how Straw Hat's gone nuts. Yet even he can't deny the tactical value. The kid is cutting a path faster than anyone. And Crocodile? He just smirks. To him, this is familiar. This is how real pirates survive. Using the battlefield. Using people. Here's the kicker. This is only one decision. One dark choice under impossible pressure. But what if that's the door? Once Luffy realizes Marineford itself can be a shield, how long until he starts making Blackbeard-style calculations on every move? Because if this is his first compromise, what's the second one going to look like? Deal with the Desert Devil, Luffy's first strategic alliance. And the answer comes faster than anyone expects, because the very next compromise crashes down in a swirl of sand. Mihawk's blade is about to take Luffy's head. In the original timeline, Crocodile dives in out of sheer spite for the world government, a chaotic clash of interests with no real plan behind it. But in this timeline, Luffy doesn't just get lucky and sprint away. He seizes the moment. Crocodile's hook clashes with Yoru, sand explodes, the strike is deflected, and Luffy doesn't run. He grabs Crocodile by the coat, yanks him close through the storm, and stares straight into those cold, reptilian eyes. You see, this is where the Blackbeard-style thinking really kicks in. And Luffy has already tasted what it means to use a battlefield. Now he's ready to use a monster. "Help me carve a path," he says, low and serious. "And when I build my empire in the New World, you get a piece." Not just a thank you, not just blind trust, concrete leverage, future access to New World routes, Straw Hat protection from marine hounds, a cut of whatever territories he plans to rip away from the Yonko. Crocodile freezes for a second. That's the pattern interrupt. This isn't the screaming rookie from Alabasta throwing punches for a princess. This is a pirate talking like a warlord, like a man who understands that allies are investments, not friendships. Doesn't that sound a little too close to how Blackbeard walked through Impel Down, recruiting monsters with promises of freedom and chaos? But here's the kicker. Crocodile likes it. He gives that thin, dangerous smile, because if this brat is willing to talk about empire in the middle of Marineford, then he's either insane or he's the kind of storm Crocodile can ride. And for once, their ambitions line up just enough. Deal. Instantly, the battlefield changes. Sandstorms roar across the plaza, blinding entire marine divisions. Sand blades impale officers before they can even shout orders. Instead of wasting stamina punching every random soldier like in the original timeline, Luffy uses Crocodile as a living bulldozer. He hops between gaps in the storm, targeting only key pieces. The execution platform, the pacifistas, the admiral's support. Crocodile isn't helping a hero. He's field testing his future business partner, and Luffy knows it. And this is the real moral slippage, ladies and gentlemen. Luffy isn't pretending they're friends. He doesn't forgive Alabasta. He doesn't expect loyalty. He just calculates that Crocodile is more useful alive and unleashed than beaten and buried. He plans to outgrow him, outmaneuver him, and, if needed, crush him later. But what if that's the point where Luffy stops being the guy who inspires everyone and starts being the guy everyone is afraid to betray? Because if he can turn Crocodile into a weapon at Marineford, who's the next devil he cuts a deal with when the war is over? Buggy the propaganda weapon, turning chaos into clout. And that's exactly where Buggy walks back into the story, like a walking meme with world-ending potential. In the original timeline, Buggy's hero of the people moment at Marineford is a pure gag. He's screaming, running for his life, and the Den Mushi just so happens to catch him at the right angle, turning cowardice into clout. But what if this time, someone else notices the lens first? What if Luffy, already thinking like Blackbeard, is the one who realizes the entire world is watching? Luffy crashes down beside Buggy, haki crackling, blood on his face, and instead of charging off, he freezes. His eyes flick to the broadcast snail, to the transponder screens, to the Marines shouting his name. You see, in this timeline, Luffy isn't just fighting for Ace. He's fighting for what comes after Marineford, for the legend, for the fear. He leans in close to Buggy, voice low so only the clown captain can hear. You want the world to fear you, right? Then help me make a scene they'll never forget. That's the deal. Alright, that's the whisper. Buggy, who lives for attention, instantly locks in. Because if Crocodile can be turned into a weapon, why not Buggy the walking propaganda machine? Let's dive into the stunt. Luffy times it perfectly. Buggy starts grandstanding right in front of the Den Mushi, yelling about how he, the great Captain Buggy, is leading the final charge to crush Marineford. He swings his arms, points dramatically at the execution platform, and behind him, Luffy vanishes with gear-boosted speed. Every time Buggy screams his own name, Luffy makes sure someone else screams, "Straw Hat Luffy!" even louder. A massive shockwave splits the plaza as Luffy smashes through a Vice Admiral line exactly on Buggy's cue. To the cameras, it looks like Buggy is commanding this monster by directing a demon in a straw hat whose Jolly Roger keeps flashing in the background. Marines shout, "It's him! Straw Hat Luffy, allied with Buggy!" Over and over, that phrase gets burned into the broadcast. Buggy the face, Luffy the force. Here's the kicker. This is exactly what Blackbeard did, just reskinned. Teach used Marineford as his stage to declare a new era, to show the world he could kill Whitebeard and steal his power. In this timeline, Luffy's doing the same kind of mental calculus. Every punch, every body on the ground, every terrified Marine backing away from that grin is an investment in his post-war reputation. A new contender for Pirate King, born in blood, not an adventure. And around the world, the effect is instant. Villagers who once cheered for that goofy smile now see something else on their screens. Luffy, drenched in blood, standing over Marine corpses, the Straw Hat flag behind him, while Buggy screams about their unstoppable alliance. Is this the same kid from East Blue, or a new monster? Because if this is how he uses Buggy at Marineford, what happens when Luffy finds an even bigger stage than this war? The true divergence. Luffy hesitates at the platform. And that bigger stage arrives in the very next heartbeat. Cannons roar, the sky is on fire. And high above the chaos of Marineford, we hit the single most iconic frame of this entire war. The execution platform. Ace on his knees, Sengoku looming, the three admirals lined up like executioners. Time doesn't just slow, it feels like the whole story holds its breath. Luffy rockets upward, rubber body screaming against gravity, coated in blood, smoke, and reputation. Now in the original timeline, this is pure instinct, pure heart. He sees Ace, he sees the platform, he sees one thing in his way. Garp, hero of the Marines, his grandfather, the fist that once beat the Pirate King into the ground. In canon, you see Luffy's answer. No hesitation, no speech. He cocks his arm back and just decks Garp out of the sky. It's raw, it's emotional, it's everything we love about him. But what if, right here, that new Blackbeard-style mindset actually kicks in? In this timeline, Luffy's fist stops a few inches from Garp's jaw. Just a heartbeat. just long enough to break the rhythm of fate. And it's not guilt freezing him, it's calculation. Luffy's eyes flick, not to Garp's face, but to the Den Mushi broadcasting everything to the world. Attack the hero of the Marines on live broadcast. And you don't just become a pirate, you become the devil himself. In that instant, we hear a different kind of inner monologue. Luffy is still Luffy, but he's thinking like a shark. If he sends Garp crashing down in front of everyone, what happens to Dragon's plans? What happens when the Revolutionary Army has to deal with their leader's father becoming a martyr for justice? Does Dragon lose the moral high ground he's been building in the shadows for decades? Does the world rally tighter around the very system Luffy wants to break? He weighs Ace's life against Garp's symbol, against Dragon's silent war, against the future he wants as Pirate King. It's brutal, it's cold, and yet it's still for his dream. Here's the kicker. He chooses the symbol over the punch. Luffy snarls. But instead of smashing Garp, he twists his trajectory and screams, "Old men clinging to a rotten world should get out of the way." That line hits everyone at once. Sengoku, the admirals, the pirates, the civilians watching. It sounds like rebellion, but it's also cover, because that was the signal. Instantly, Crocodile whips up a blinding sandstorm across the plaza. Buggy accidentally detonates a massive explosion near the scaffold, hamming it up as his own grand attack. Ivankov fires off a hormone boost that sends Luffy slingshotting sideways through the chaos instead of straight through Garp. He doesn't reach Ace with a straight line punch anymore. He reaches him by outplaying the entire board. And that tiny hesitation, that single beat of strategy gives the admirals a window. Kizaru's light shifts. Wii Aokiji's ice creeps up the scaffold. Akainu's magma arm readies. Saving Ace is no longer just about heart. It's about whether this darker Luffy can outthink Marineford's command structure in real time. So what happens to the war when the symbol of reckless freedom starts playing chess instead of charging headfirst? Ace's chains and Luffy's calculus? Saving a brother or starting an era? So when that chess-playing Luffy actually reaches the platform, everything slows down for a second. Not for Marineford, not for the admirals, but for us and for Ace. In the original timeline, this is pure emotion. Luffy sobbing, Ace stunned, everyone watching the miracle. But what if, in this timeline, that miracle is also a calculated theft in broad daylight? Luffy slams the key into the cuffs. His hands are shaking, but not just from relief. You see, he's already looking at Ace the way Blackbeard looked at Whitebeard's fruit, as something the whole era revolves around. A living symbol of Whitebeard's flag, a commander-level monster who can anchor a future fleet. While the chains rattle, Luffy's eyes aren't just crying, they're measuring. He leans in close, so only Ace can hear him over the roar of Marineford. This is where the script changes completely. Instead of just yelling, "I'm here to save you," he whispers, "When we get out, we're not going back to the old world. We're going to build our own. With your fire and my flag, nobody will touch us." It's not a plea. It's an offer. Almost a recruitment speech. Ace freezes for half a heartbeat. Gratitude hits first. His little brother came through hell again. But instantly there's something else. Unease. Why, that tone wasn't the goofy kid from Alabasta, or the stubborn idiot from Water 7 who punched a world noble without thinking. This Luffy sounds like someone who's seen how Blackbeard moves and decided to learn the lesson, not just hate the man. Let's dive into the strategic layer, because this is where it gets nasty in the best way. By saving Ace, Luffy isn't just rescuing family, he's hijacking the succession of an entire era. Whitebeard's heir was supposed to die here, breaking the old man's will and giving Blackbeard the emotional and symbolic victory he needed to declare his age. In the original timeline, Teach kills Whitebeard and steals the Gura Gura no Mi to crown himself. But in this timeline, Luffy steals something just as important, the living will of Whitebeard's crew. He rips Ace out from under the Marine's justice and out of Blackbeard's shadow. Suddenly, Teach doesn't get to say, "I ended Whitebeard's line." The world government doesn't get to say, "We executed the Pirate King's son." Luffy walks off with both legacies in his camp. Here's the kicker. That means Ace isn't just a brother anymore. He's a piece on the board, a future Yonko candidate, a potential second flagship under the Straw Hat banner, and Luffy knows it. So when he saves Ace, what are we really watching? A man who can't bear to lose his brother again? Or a rising emperor who refuses to let the Marines or Blackbeard control the strongest asset of the old era? And when Ace realizes that, does he follow Luffy's new calculus? Or fight it? Because the next move Luffy makes will tell us which one he truly is. As Whitebeard's last stand, rewritten, a new inheritance. Because the next move Luffy makes will tell us which one he truly is, and Whitebeard sees it. We cut to that towering, broken giant of a man, chest full of holes, half his face gone, still standing like a mountain as Luffy shatters Ace's cuffs. In the original timeline, this is the moment where Whitebeard just smiles and quietly entrusts the future to the next generation. But what if, in this timeline, his gaze sharpens? Because what he's seeing isn't just a reckless kid. He's seeing a monster in progress. You see, from his vantage point, Whitebeard has watched every move. Luffy doesn't just charge anymore. He ducks behind allies when Kizaru fires, letting fodder pirates eat the light. He times his pushes with Crocodile sandstorms, using that former enemy as mobile cover. He even barks orders at Buggy, weaponizing Buggy's accidental fame to pull more bodies into the line of fire. That's not random chaos, that's calculated. And for the man who once housed Blackbeard on his own ship, those patterns are way too familiar. Whitebeard remembers Teach waiting decades for the right devil fruit. He remembers those quiet, hungry eyes. Now he sees a different boy, with Roger's straw hat and Roger's will, making the same kind of cold reads in the middle of Marineford. Luffy saves Ace, yes, but he also turns the entire battlefield into a board and everyone into pieces. Here's the kicker. Whitebeard doesn't just feel pride, he feels dread. So when the Quake Man finally roars his last orders, the speech changes. In the original timeline, he just yells for his sons to protect Luffy. It calls him the spark of the next era. In this timeline, his voice booms across the war with something sharper. Marco, commanders, that brat will either save this sea or burn it to ashes. Watch him, guide him, or stop him. Instantly, everyone freezes. The pirates hear it, the Marines hear it, even Sengoku's eyes narrow, because that is not a simple blessing. That is a warning label slapped onto one rookie's forehead. Then comes the declaration the whole world is waiting for. Whitebeard still drives his Naginata into the ground and roars that the One Piece is real. The sea shakes, the sky splits, just like we remember. But this time, he turns his ruined face toward the execution platform, toward Sengoku, the cameras, the world. One Piece exists. But pray, the one who finds it values freedom more than power, because I've seen the other kind today. Who's he talking about? Blackbeard? Luffy? Both? That single line becomes a curse and a crown. To pirates, Luffy is now the kid Whitebeard marked as potential savior or tyrant. To Marines, he's no longer just Garp's reckless grandson. He's a possible second Blackbeard with Nika's smile. And as the smoke of Marineford starts to clear, everyone is asking the same question. What if Whitebeard was right? Sengoku and Garp. When family becomes a strategic threat. And up above all that chaos, we shift perspectives. Sengoku isn't charging, he isn't shouting, he's watching. At first, he files Luffy away as the same problem he was in the original timeline, a chaotic nuisance, a walking disaster with a famous bloodline. Yet the kid who keeps punching admirals with no plan. But what if this time, the no plan is a mask? You see, when Sengoku starts actually tracking Luffy's movements, the pattern hits him like a quake. Luffy isn't just rushing, he's choosing. He ignores enemies he doesn't need to fight, slipping past vice admirals instead of wasting time trading blows. He weaponizes Buggy's fame and the live broadcast, turning every reckless charge into a message to the world. He positions himself near Crocodile and the other heavy hitters, nudging the chaos so it always opens a path toward Ace. That's not pure impulse, that's opportunism, that's Blackbeard energy. Let's dive into Sengoku's head for a second. This is the man who lived through God Valley. He remembers rocks, he remembers Roger. And he remembers that every era-shattering monster came from nowhere and wore a smile before they wore a crown. And suddenly, he's watching a D on the battlefield who has Roger's charisma, but is starting to move with Teach's cold timing. Here's the kicker. Sengoku links it instantly to the Will of D and the Void Century. Whitebeard's words about the one who will shake the world. The mysterious family of D that always appears when history is about to be rewritten. In this timeline, with Luffy using the war like a stage, Sengoku doesn't just see a reckless kid. He sees a prototype of the worst-case scenario. A D who can inspire like Roger, but is willing to use chaos like Blackbeard. And that terrifies him more than any Yonko. So he turns to the one man who knows that boy better than anyone. Garp. Garp is already shaking. In the original timeline, he was paralyzed between love and duty. But here, there's a third blade twisting in his chest. He's watching Luffy make deals with devils, push allies like chess pieces, and it hits him. This isn't just the carefree brat chasing meat and freedom. This is a pirate who could become exactly the monster Garp spent his whole life punching down. More destabilizing than Roger. Closer to rocks. Closer to Teach. Sengoku steps in front of him mid-battle, voice low but cutting through the roar. You see it too, don't you? That boy isn't just your grandson. He's the storm Teach wanted to be. That line doesn't just call out Garp. It forces a question on all of us. If Luffy keeps walking this path, does stopping him now save more lives later? Does a punch here prevent a future Marineford multiplied by 10? Garp's fist clenches. He remembers Kobe, Ace, Dragon, all the kids who chose the sea. He looks at Luffy, smiling like Nika, but moving like Blackbeard, and he can't swing. But he also can't sit back down and pretend this is the same happy-go-lucky fool. So in this timeline, Garp makes a different non-choice. He turns away from the platform. He walks off, shoulders heavy, abandoning the front line entirely. Not helping Luffy, not stopping him, just leaving a storm to grow unchecked. And as Garp disappears into the smoke, One question hangs over Marineford like a death sentence. If even Garp runs from what Luffy is becoming, who's actually going to stand in his way next? Admirals versus a calculating Luffy. The war's second phase Marineford doesn't calm down after Garp leaves. It mutates. Because the second phase of the war is where Luffy stops being a rampaging rookie and starts acting like a proto-Yonko. In the original timeline, Luffy kept throwing himself at walls, admirals, giant vice admirals, anything between him and Ace. But what if, in this timeline, he looks up at 3 admirals on that platform and decides something terrifying? They're not his real targets yet. The system around them is, so instead of charging a Kainu head-on, he vanishes into the smoke and goes hunting for the marine support structure. You see, suddenly, artillery positions start going silent. Luffy pops in with gear second, rubber limbs blurring as he smashes cannons, snaps elevation gears, and slingshots explosive shells back into marine lines. Pacifistas march forward like in the original timeline, but now he's ready. And gear third fingers jam into their mouths, ballooned bones wrenching their heads sideways so their lasers rip through other cyborgs and frozen wave structures instead of pirates. Here's the kicker. He's not doing this alone, he's directing. He grabs Ivankov mid-charge, shouts quick coordinates, and turns Iva's hormones into a tactical weapon instead of a last-ditch buff. At key choke points, Iva unleashes adrenaline shock troops, temporarily boosted prisoners and New World pirates, right as Luffy has already crippled the nearby pacifistas. Those surges punch holes in marine lines that shouldn't exist. At the same time, he links up with Jinbei. Let's dive into how nasty that gets. Luffy points at incoming marine reinforcements, ships trying to circle the bay. Jinbei, using Fishman Karate, redirects tidal waves and shattered icebergs. He's slamming them into those routes. Whole channels get sealed off. Reinforcement ships are forced into narrow kill zones, where Whitebeard's remaining commanders and Crocodile can feast. It's Blackbeard-style crew synergy, but with Luffy as the one calling the place. Kizaru tries to snipe this from above, turning into light and raining lasers down on Luffy's sabotage runs. Aokiji pushes forward to refreeze the chaos. That's exactly what Luffy wants. He baits them, darting just inside their range, and then retreating toward fresh quake fractures. One misstep, and a casual Whitebeard punch sends shockwaves lacing through Aokiji's ice, or destabilizing Kizaru's footing, forcing the admirals to burn stamina just to stay safe. Akainu is furious. This isn't the hot-headed brat he expected. This is a pirate threatening the very image of Marineford. Luffy stretches his arms into the already cracked foundations of towers and walls, yelling across the battlefield that if the admirals don't reposition away from the execution platform, he'll bring whole sections of the plaza down on civilians and lower-ranked marines. It's not a bluff, and everyone can tell. And then, we get the standout clash. Luffy rockets straight at an admiral, not to win, but to learn. Let's say it's Aokiji this time. Gear second fists clash with frozen spears, Conqueror's sparks fly, and for a few brutal exchanges, Luffy tests everything. Reaction speed, freezing range, how long it takes Kuzan to switch from ice armor to wide area attacks. The moment he feels his limbs numbing and clocks the timing, he bails, slinging himself away into the ruins before Aokiji can lock him down. And that's what really unnerves the Marines. They're used to pirates either charging blindly until they fall or retreating once the tide turns. This mix of insane courage and cold strategy feels like facing a young, unchained Sengoku. But on the enemy side, Vice Admirals hesitate. Fodder Marines flinch when they see that Straw Hat's silhouette vanish into the smoke, because they don't know if he's coming to save someone or to collapse the ground under them. And as the admirals are dragged off their perfect formation and the battlefield itself turns into Luffy's weapon, you have to wonder, if this is how he fights before he even reaches Ace, what happens when he finally gets there? Blackbeard arrives and finds his role stolen. And that's exactly when the man who lives off chaos walks into a battlefield that's already been claimed. In the original timeline, Blackbeard arrives at Marineford like a vulture. Whitebeard's dying. Ace is dead. The war is broken. Perfect conditions for a thief of eras. But in this timeline, when the darkness blooms at the edge of the plaza and Teach steps out with his crew, he doesn't see prey. He sees Luffy. The first thing that hits him isn't the smell of blood, it's the sound. Orders from a Straw Hat. Whitebeard's commanders, those same legends who once followed only one man, are now moving in sync with Luffy's shouted commands. Jozu, lock down Kizaru's light. Vista, carve a path to the ships. You see Marines and pirates both glancing up, not at the execution platform anymore, but at the rubber upstart who hijacked the war. Ace isn't in chains. He's on the front line, flames roaring, back to back with his little brother. And that single fact kills Blackbeard's first plan instantly. No dramatic rescue to fail. No shattered Whitebeard to exploit in that exact moment of grief. The script he was banking on? Torn up. He looks to Whitebeard next. In the original timeline, this was the window. An exhausted old man, stabbed, burned, ready to be finished off and harvested. But what if Whitebeard never got that clean, lonely death? In this timeline, thanks to Luffy's chaos, the admirals have been dragged off their formation. The ground is warped. The battlefield is a maze of craters and rubberized shockwaves. There is no quiet, perfect angle to sneak in the killing blow. So we get the pattern interrupt. Instead of rushing Whitebeard, Teach locks eyes with Luffy. Silence for half a heartbeat. Then that ugly, booming laugh. Zeh-ha-ha-ha! Straw Hat, you've got darkness in you after all. Using the war like this? I like it. He praises Luffy's ambition, not as some naive rookie, but as someone who weaponized chaos the way he himself did with Impel Down. Luffy doesn't smile. He remembers that prison, the bodies Teach left behind, the lesson. Yeah, thanks for that, he says, voice cold. You taught me how trash like you moves in the dark. I'll use it better. No all-out clash, not yet. Instead, they trade futures. Teach tilts his head toward Whitebeard, then away, already recalculating. Teach, this stage is noisy. Fine, I'll hunt power elsewhere. The world's full of monsters and fruits waiting for my flag. Luffy fires back without hesitation. Go ahead. Every sea you touch, every island you scare, and one day they're all gonna fly my flag instead. That's the real what if. A Luffy who doesn't just want freedom for his crew, but intends to overwrite Blackbeard's entire empire before it even exists. Yami darkness curls across the shattered plaza, swallowing light. Rubber arms stretch across the same ruin, pulling allies together, redirecting cannons, asserting control. Two forces, two futures, crossing without colliding. Marineford isn't Blackbeard's stage anymore. It's the prologue where two future emperors silently agree on one thing. The real war between them hasn't even started yet. The escape that becomes a statement. Retreat as a power move. Blackbeard leaves Marineford with a corpse and a stolen power. Luffy leaves with something way more dangerous. A narrative. Because in the original timeline, the retreat is chaos. A Law's submarine pops up like a miracle. Shanks appears as a red-haired timeout button, and everyone just scrambles. But what if Luffy doesn't let his escape be an accident? What if, in this timeline, he decides the way he leaves Marineford will echo louder than the way he arrived? You see, the moment his eyes meet Blackbeard's across that ruined plaza, Luffy reads the field. Whitebeard is dead. The Marines are regrouping. The Admirals are still fresh. This is the tipping point. Instead of charging until he drops, he suddenly does something terrifyingly calculated. He starts giving orders. Rubber arms yank commanders in close. Jinbei, Ivankov, Crocodile, Buggy, even the Impel Down monsters. Everyone hears the same thing. One last hit, then we vanish. In the original timeline, the pirates are just trying to survive. In this timeline, Luffy weaponizes their desperation into a statement. He calls for a coordinated barrage. Whitebeard's remnants line up their cannons. Impel Down escapees unleash everything. Poison, blades, crazy devil fruits. Allied crews fire into the plaza in a single, roaring volley. The ground that already cracked under Whitebeard's quake now explodes, collapses, and craters, leaving a jagged scar tearing straight through Marineford's proud execution square. It's not just damage, it's graffiti on the world government's face. And here's the kicker. Not everyone gets to leave. As the counterattack fires, Luffy is already mapping routes to the bay, to Law's sub, to any ship that can still move. Some Allied crews are too slow, too wounded, too deep in Marine lines. They beg for cover. They shout Straw Hat's name. Luffy looks back, jaw clenched. And then turns away. He orders Ace, Jinbei, his core assets to move, now. Those lagging crews realize the truth a second too late. Their last stand becomes the smokescreen that hides Luffy's exit. They're cut down by admirals and vice admirals. Their Jolly Rogers burning while the cameras keep rolling. Luffy knows exactly what he's doing. Sacrifices today so the Straw Hat flag survives tomorrow. On the broadcast, he stops running just long enough to face the Den Den Mushi. Bloodied, Ace at his side, he doesn't plead. He doesn't thank Shanks. He declares, "The age of begging for freedom is over. If you want to be free, then survive under my storm." Remember this scar on Marineford. That's the mark of the Straw Hat. Around the world, everyone freezes. Villages, slums, reverie halls. Us Marines and pirates alike realize this isn't just Garp's grandson screaming anymore. This is a D who thinks like Blackbeard and fights like Roger. Newspapers don't say botched execution, they scream new emperor rising. But if Luffy just made retreat into a power move, what happens when the New World tests whether that threat was real or bluff? Time skip in the shadows, training for power, planning for empire. So now the whole world is asking if that threat at Marineford was real. The New World is waiting. And Luffy? He disappears. In the original timeline, that 2-year break was about getting stronger. Training, hockey, new moves. But what if, in this timeline, it's also about something way darker? Not just power for survival, power for conquest. On Rusakaina, Rayleigh throws spears, beasts charge, and Luffy still laughs and bleeds and pushes gear 2 and 3. That part doesn't change, but between clashes, when Rayleigh expects questions about hockey, Luffy suddenly asks something else. How did Roger hold the Grand Line? How did he manage islands, split territory, and keep monsters like Whitebeard from turning on him? Who did he bribe? Who did he scare? Who did he leave alone? You see, Rayleigh starts telling stories he never shared in the original timeline, about deals with underworld brokers in the Sabaody shadows, about quietly backing certain kings so the world government stayed off their backs, about when Roger smiled and when he bared his fangs. Luffy listens, not with childlike wonder, but with a Blackbeard-like focus. He's building a blueprint of how a pirate king actually rules. At night, while meat roasts over a fire, much the island floor becomes a map of the new world. Luffy carves Yonko territories into the dirt. Big Mom's candy kingdoms, Kaido's weapon factories, Blackbeard's expanding graveyard of flags. He marks warlord spheres of influence, revolutionary hotspots, Cypher Paul routes, places like Dressrosa, Punk Hazard, Baltigo, even Fishman Island. Some get X's, some get circles, targets, future allies, testing grounds. He used to drool over meat. In this timeline, he stares at that crude map with the same hunger. Then there's a new kind of training. Rayleigh pushes his conqueror's haki, but Luffy pushes something else. Presence. He walks through herds of beasts and doesn't just knock them out. He steps close, holds the pressure, and watches which ones tremble, which ones kneel, which ones still glare back. He's learning how to crack wills without throwing a punch, how to make surrender feel inevitable, how to use fear the way Blackbeard does to recruit and control. He imagines walking into a pirate den, saying nothing, and having half the room join him on instinct. Or dropping a single glare on a king at reverie and forcing a treaty. Meanwhile, the rest of the Straw Hats train. But there's an unease under the grind. Nami hears rumors in Witheria about Marineford. Luffy ripping through vice admirals with a smile that looked a little too calm. Chopper hears stories on Torino of a D, who used prisoners and warlords as stepping stones. They tell themselves it's exaggerated. But what if it isn't? Zoro, cutting down human drills, just shrugs. The world won't change with kindness alone. Robin, buried in ancient texts, and understands better than anyone that every era of freedom was built on someone's terror. 2 years pass in sweat, blood, and strategy. One night, under a sky packed with stars, Luffy stands over his dirt map one last time. Islands. Names. Enemies. Prey. He grips his straw hat and makes a quiet, terrifying vow. He'll be Pirate King no matter how ugly the path gets. If the world government wants a monster, then ladies and gentlemen, he'll give them a monster they can't cage. But when that monster finally sails back into the new world, who dares stand in his way first? Return to Sabaody, a reunion under a darker captain. And the first ones to feel that monster's presence again are his own crew. Sabaody, the archipelago of bubbles, slavery, and shattered dreams. In the original timeline, this reunion is pure joy, pure chaos, a pure Straw Hat energy. Luffy tackling Nami, Chopper crying, Frankie flexing, everyone laughing like the 2 years were just a nap. But what if that same scene plays out, with a captain who's learned from Blackbeard instead of just from Rayleigh? Luffy steps onto Grove 42 and instantly locks onto the fake Straw Hats. The imposter Luffy bragging, the fake Zoro drinking, the cheap flags waving. Everyone else is annoyed or amused. Luffy is silent. His eyes don't just see clowns, you see. He sees something else. How easily his name became a weapon. How his brand can pull fodder into a death trap without him lifting a finger. Here's the kicker. In the original timeline, Luffy just one-shots the fake captain and moves on. In this timeline, he watches longer than anyone's comfortable with. Measuring. Calculating. Wondering how many islands would kneel if he let rumors like this run wild on purpose. Then the Marines close in. Boots on wood, rifles up, shouting about the Straw Hats' return. Zoro's hand goes to his swords. Sanji lights a cigarette, ready to kick someone through a bubble. You expect the classic Sabaody brawl, right? Luffy raises his hand and tells them to stand down. No Gear 2 entrance, no flashy conqueror's hockey flex. Just a low command. They're leaving. Pointless fights waste resources. Worse, they reveal too much about what they learned in those 2 years. He doesn't need the world to see their upgraded arsenal yet. He needs mystery. He needs fear. Zoro respects it instantly. A clean escape, no wasted motion, no pointless detours? That's efficient. That's Predator thinking. Sanji grumbles. Complains that kicking a few Marines is good for the soul, but he falls in line because the captain's eyes aren't joking. Robin. She looks like she's been waiting for this Luffy to show up. For her, a pirate who thinks like a Yonko is just the world finally admitting what it already is. But Nami and Chopper feel it. When the fake Straw Hats and nearby civilians get swallowed up in the Marine crackdown, Luffy doesn't look back. No rescue, no outrage, just one cold calculation that they chose their flag and that's that. Nami feels a chill. Chopper suddenly wonders what happens to people Luffy can't use. Later, away from the noise, Luffy speaks quietly with Rayleigh at the Sunny. He doesn't just want to sail through the new world anymore. He wants territory. Safe zones under his flag. Islands that answer to him. Not Big Mom, not Kaido. And it's not Blackbeard. Rayleigh warns him. ruling and freeing are two very different things. Which one is the Pirate King chasing? Let's dive into that question as the Thousand Sunny departs Sabaody. This isn't just a goofy ship of adventurers anymore. This is the future flagship of a Shadow Emperor. And as they descend toward Fishman Island, Luffy's not just thinking about candy and adventure. He's already mapping conquests, weighing alliances, and deciding which kings get to keep their thrones. And which ones feed his legend. Fishman Island as a prototype territory. Freedom with strings attached. As the Sunny sinks beneath the coating and the light fades, Luffy isn't just staring at the ocean wonders. He's staring at a map in his head. Routes, choke points, future enemies. Fishman Island isn't just the next stop on the adventure anymore. It's the gate to the new world. In the original timeline, Fishman Island is a detour, a promise to a friend, a fun, candy-coated arc with a serious message about racism and inherited hatred. But what if, in this timeline, Luffy looks at it the way Blackbeard would? You see, this island sits on top of every undersea route. It has a warrior race built for underwater combat. It's directly under the Red Line, right beneath Mariejua. That's not just a place to save. That's a future fortress. So when Hody and the new Fishman pirates make their move, the core conflict stays the same. The drugs, the hate, the coup, the execution platform. Only this time, Luffy is watching Hody like a case study. This is what happens when you leave a people unprotected, one when the flag above them belongs to weak kings and absent gods. Every slash Hody lands on Neptune. In Luffy's mind, that's a sales pitch for why Fishman Island needs him. He still crushes Hody, of course. Gear 3, Haki, overwhelming dominance. But here's the kicker. After the victory, he doesn't just shout, "This island is under my protection," and move on. He walks into Ryugu Palace, dripping seawater and blood, and demands a treaty. Not a favor, a contract. Fishman Island becomes Straw Hat territory. In exchange, Luffy guarantees protection, future backup against the world government, and a place in the empire he's quietly building. Nami's smile freezes. Because who did this exact thing back in the East Blue? Arlong, a pirate who flew his flag over a human village and called it protection while he squeezed them dry. And now her own captain is negotiating to put the Straw Hat over an entire kingdom. Is this freedom or occupation with a friendlier face? She doesn't say it out loud yet, but you can feel that storm brewing. Jinbei feels it too. His homeland has always lived under someone's shadow. Whitebeard's mark, Big Mom's deal, the world government's heel. Trading one protector for another is the same game with a different dealer. But Luffy doesn't back off. He leans in. And this is where Luffy uses fear. He stands before Neptune, Shirahoshi, the princes, and the gathered citizens, and reminds them what just happened. He points at the shattered plaza, the terrified children, the bodies Hody left behind. Then he asks a brutal question. What happens when the next Hody shows up, and there's no Emperor's flag here? No name that makes invaders hesitate? He doesn't threaten them directly. He doesn't have to. He just lets their own trauma finish the argument. Instantly, the mood shifts. The people who were just cheering their savior now realize they can't imagine life without him. Dependence locks in. The treaty is signed. That night, Fishman Island explodes into celebration. Fireworks under the sea, music in the bubble streets, citizens crying with relief as the Straw Hat flag rises beside Ryugu's. Everyone calls it liberation. But in the dark corners of the coral alleys, whispers spread. Is that Jolly Roger a promise of safety? Or a warning that their freedom now comes with invisible chains? And when word of this new territory reaches the surface, which monsters are going to feel challenged enough to respond? Ice Punk Hazard and Dressrosa, alliances with a price tag. Fishman Island falls under the Straw Hat banner and the news rockets across the new world. But what if the next stop is where Luffy really starts acting like a Shadow Emperor? Let's dive into Punk Hazard. In the original timeline, Punk Hazard is chaotic but simple. Luffy likes Law, Law hates Caesar, they shake hands, boom, alliance. In this timeline, Luffy still sticks his hand out, but he doesn't let go. He looks Law dead in the eye and says this isn't just about taking down Kaido for fun. He wants equal say in every long-term move, every Yonko strike, every territory decision. And here's the kicker. Luffy adds a clause. Any powerful devil fruits that appear along the way, he reserves the right to claim them for his future elite guard. You see, this is Luffy learning from Blackbeard without becoming Blackbeard. He's seen what a single broken power like the Gura Gura can do at Marineford. So when they talk about smashing Kaido's smile network and dismantling his empire, Luffy's already thinking, who replaces that vacuum? Us? Or someone worse? That's why Caesar Clown isn't just a walking punching bag here. Luffy still hates him, still decks him. But instead of instantly treating him as trash, he pauses. What if this mad scientist could mass-produce weapons, chemical deterrents, sea-stone tools tailored for his crew? For a second, Luffy actually considers it, forcing Caesar to work under him, using that genius to arm his growing fleet, the way Blackbeard would chain a monster and throw it at the world. And that's the moment that scares his crew more than any dragon. Then Usopp and Chopper freeze when they hear Luffy ask, What can we use him for? Robin watches silently, weighing the strategic value. Law, who's already walked through the hell of Doflamingo's underworld, just nods. This is how you topple emperors. But then Luffy looks around, sees Nami's disgust, Sanji's glare, the kid Caesar experimented on shaking in the corner. He drops it. He knocks Caesar out and chains him for delivery instead. Still, the question lingers. How close did he just sail to Blackbeard's line? Dressrosa answers that. Doflamingo falls, but Luffy doesn't just walk away laughing this time. The birdcage drops, the toys return, and while everyone's crying with joy, Luffy is already talking terms. In front of King Riku, Rebecca, and the citizens, he insists on a formal alliance. And Dressrosa gets protection from any Yonko or world government retaliation. In return, the restored Riku regime guarantees a permanent supply line, food, weapons, medical stock, and a safe harbor for the Straw Hat fleet. Usopp and Chopper are shaken. Isn't this exploiting a traumatized country that was just freed? But Robin quietly points out that Whitebeard's era was built on exactly these kinds of deals. Law backs her up. If they're serious about challenging Kaido and the world government, they need a network of loyal islands, not just friends. By the time the sun sets, Dressrosa's harbor has a new silhouette. The Riku flag flies high, and beside it, the Straw Hat Jolly Roger flaps in the wind. Not as an occupying force, no marines in sight, no chains on the people, just a silent reminder written across the skyline. This kingdom's peace now depends on the goodwill of a pirate who thinks like Blackbeard. And as more nations see that flag and start to wonder whether to resist or submit, you can feel it. The age of Luffy, the Liberator, is mutating into the age of Luffy, the Emperor. The Straw Hat Fleet, from accidental followers to deliberate vassals. And that's where Dressrosa stops being a happy ending and starts feeling like a board meeting for a rising emperor. In the original timeline, that massive banquet with the 7 allied captains is just chaos, food fights, and Luffy screaming that he doesn't want to be anyone's boss. But what if, in this timeline, that one moment is where he leans into the Blackbeard mindset we've been building? Picture it. The sake cups are raised, everyone's cheering, and Cavendish, Bartolomeo, Hadruden, all of them are ready to swear themselves to Luffy. He opens his mouth to give the same goofy refusal, and then he freezes. Marineford flashes behind his eyes. Ace on the platform. Blackbeard standing over Whitebeard's corpse, instantly crowned by fear and fire, because he brought an army with him while Luffy charged in alone. You see the realization hit him. Charging alone is how you lose the people you love. So he sits down, quiet, serious. The music doesn't stop, but the mood does. Pattern interrupt. Luffy takes the first cup of sake with a calm, almost regal stare, and everyone notices this isn't the usual rubber clown. He says it outright. If they sail under his flag, they're not just picking bar fights with random pirates. They're signing up to fight the Yonko, the Marines, the Celestial Dragons, the entire world government. He promises freedom, but he also promises war. Let's dive into how deep that decision goes. Because Luffy doesn't just say, do what you want, and laugh it off. In this timeline, he thinks like a Yonko. He starts assigning roles. Cavendish and his speed, perfect for reconnaissance and sudden decapitation strikes on high-value targets. Bartolomeo's barriers become the backbone of smuggling routes, escorting weapons and liberated slaves between Straw Hat territories. Hadruden's giants handle heavy assaults and diversionary raids, drawing marine fleets away while Luffy hits the real objective. Here's the kicker. It's organized. It's structured. It's Blackbeard-level planning filtered through Luffy's chaos. Frankie is hyped, already sketching blueprints for mobile docking stations and underwater supply depots. Brook is thrilled when talking about concerts that double as covert intel-gathering missions across the Grand Line. Zoro just smirks, because more muscle means fewer wasted swings when the real monsters show up. But Nami? Nami is doing the math. The ships, the food, the bribes, the cost in gold, and the cost in lives. She sees what a Straw Hat war machine really means. Every raid, every smuggling run, every toppled flag will drag innocent people into the crossfire. And she doesn't say no. That's the scary part. She just starts planning the most efficient way to manage an empire. And from that night on, these aren't accidental followers. They're deliberate vassals. So, when one allied crew goes too far, burns a town, executes a corrupt king, slaughters marines who tried to surrender, who gets blamed? Luffy. And the boy who wanted freedom is now responsible for an entire network's sins, inching closer to Blackbeard's brand of rule. And the next time the world hears Straw Hat Fleet, will they think of liberation or terror? Whole Cake Island, rescuing Sanji, raiding a Yonko. So when the world starts whispering Straw Hat Fleet like it's a curse, Luffy's next move has to be loud. Where do you go if your name already scares people? Straight into a Yonko's kitchen. Literally. Whole Cake Island. In the original timeline, Whole Cake is framed as a desperate rescue. Save Sanji, break the wedding, run. But what if, in this timeline, Luffy looks at Big Mom's candy empire, her political marriages, her underworld reach, and thinks, This is a rehearsal for taking down emperors? Saving Sanji is the heart. Smashing an economy is the play. Let's dive into how that changes everything. Luffy still charges in for his cook, but he's not blind to the opportunity anymore. He hears about Big Mom's deals with the world government, the candy tribute to the celestial dragons, the way her sweets factories keep entire nations dependent. And suddenly, this isn't just about one friend at a tea party. It's about cutting off a Yonko's fingers while she's distracted. Enter Capone Bege. In the original timeline, Luffy just teams up for an assassination. Chaos buddies. But in this timeline, Luffy sits across from Bege and treats him like a stepping stone. He agrees to help kill Big Mom at the tea party, sure. But here's the kicker. He demands access, underworld contacts, smuggling routes, safe harbors, weapons lines. If Bege wants Straw Hat muscle and Gear 5 level chaos on his side, then part of the Fire Tank network gets folded into the Straw Hat Shadow Empire. You see, Bege thinks he's using Luffy as a bomb. Luffy is using Bege as a blueprint. While the Castle Man is planning bullet trajectories, Luffy is mapping shipping lanes. So when the wedding explodes into madness, Luffy doesn't just scream at Big Mom and improvise. He starts calling shots like a Yonko in training. Jinbei and the Sun Pirates hit the treasure vaults and secure the poneglyph copies. Nami and Chopper target the candy factories and distribution ports, burn ledgers, wreck supply chains. Pedro and the Minks sabotage communication lines and Tado Land's port defenses, so Big Mom can't instantly retaliate on her vassal nations. Every move has a second purpose. Every explosion is also a message. Your influence isn't safe. And Sanji? He's caught in the middle. He's still the broken groom, kneeling in the rain, cigarette shaking as Luffy holds out a hand and says, "You're our cook. Come back." He's grateful. He's crying. But as they escape through streets lit by burning candy stores and panicking citizens, he sees children screaming, bakers losing everything, innocent Whole Cake residents crushed under the fallout of Straw Hat sabotage. Is this really the same captain who once starved with him on a rock, refusing to steal another man's food? Or is this a new Luffy, one who'll wreck an island's livelihood if it means weakening a future rival? Big Mom's roar answers that question for the world. She stands amid ruined factories, looted vaults, and shattered political plans, wedding alliance in pieces, poneglyph intel stolen, the underworld channels leaking toward a new pirate. A rival didn't just invade her home, he used it as training grounds for empire building. And as news of Tado Land's humiliation spreads, one question hangs over the seas. When Luffy sets his sights on Wano and Kaido next, how far is he willing to go? Wano as the first true Straw Hat Dominion Tado Land was a rehearsal. Wano is the real show. You see, if Whole Cake was Luffy testing what it means to break an emperor on their own turf, Wano is where that Blackbeard-style mindset fully mutates into something else, Dominion. In the original timeline, Wano is a closed nation that gets liberated, celebrated, and then the Straw Hats sail away. But what if this timeline refuses to let Luffy just walk off into the sunset after beating Kaido? Wano is a perfect test case, and isolated by design. Resource-rich with sea stone and weapon foundries, overflowing with hardened samurai and yakuza, already conditioned to follow a strongman's rule. And crucially, it's under a Yonko's thumb. That's exactly the kind of board Blackbeard loves to flip. So when Gear 5 Luffy smashes Kaido into the Flower Capital and the Dragon Falls, the world thinks the story ends there. It doesn't. Instead of partying, sleeping, and leaving politics to everyone else, Luffy does something that instantly tells you he's changed. He calls for a formal deal, not a speech about freedom, a structure. In this timeline, he tells Momonosuke straight, Wano can keep its shogun, its customs, its Kozuki pride, but its borders, ports, and weapon output now fall under Straw Hat protection. Protection or control? Well, that's the question everyone starts whispering. Let's dive into how different the epilogue looks. In the original timeline, the samurai kneel to Momonosuke alone. Here, the oaths are doubled. Blade to the floor for the young shogun, and then blade raised toward the sea, swearing to the Jolly Roger that toppled Kaido. The Straw Hat flag is hoisted over Kyuri's shipyards and over the secret mines of Udon. Seastone cuffs, bullets, and upgraded blades begin leaving Wano under trade agreements. But those shipments just happen to line up with Straw Hat operations from Dressrosa's remnants to Fishman Island's defense lines. Here's the kicker. Luffy isn't taxing peasants or building prisons. He's redirecting Wano's war machine outward, turning it into the logistical backbone of his rising empire. That's exactly how Blackbeard would think. But wrapped in Luffy's language of protecting friends, Momonosuke is torn apart by it. He remembers Orochi and Kaido as foreign tyrants who hijacked Wano's strength. Now his savior is asking for Wano's ports, its gates, its guns. Is this freedom, or a gentler collar? He walks the halls with his father's journal in hand, wondering if this is what Odin wanted when he opened the borders. And Yamato? Yamato is the emotional fault line. They admire Luffy's strength, his smile, his promise to topple tyrants. But when they watch Straw Hat officers coordinate sea stone shipments and patrol routes, they suddenly see shadows of Kaido's command rooms. Does following Odin's hero mean watching Wano become the first true Straw Hat Dominion? Final shot, the shores of Wano at dawn. Kaido's dragon banners smolder in piles, ashes kicked into the sea. As above the restored Torii gates, a single Straw Hat Jolly Roger snaps in the wind. For some, it's hope. For others, it's a warning that a new emperor has claimed his first fortress. And as that flag is spotted by passing ships, one fear spreads across the new world. Which nation becomes Straw Hat territory next? Straw Hat crew under pressure. Cracks in the dream. That fear spreads fast. Too fast. Because once Wano falls under that Straw Hat banner, every new island knows one thing. When Luffy arrives in this timeline, the world changes. But not always for the better. Let's dive into the Sunny's deck a few weeks later. The crew's chasing a Cypher Paul convoy that's carrying a dangerous Devil Fruit user Luffy wants to recruit or break. They win. The convoy sinks. But Luffy orders the ship to keep sailing instead of rescuing a small allied crew that got caught in the crossfire. The Marines are calling a buster call on that area, and Luffy decides they're already done. Nami freezes. In the original timeline, this is the girl who screamed at Luffy to help her village, who watched Arlong crush lives for strategy. Now she's staring at her own captain giving the same cold order. She pulls the log post close, hands shaking, and you see her calculating the currents. Not to chase treasure, but to see if there's any way to save both. There isn't. And Luffy doesn't even try. Chopper's worse. Our little doctor runs below deck, slamming the infirmary door because he can still hear that allied captain begging through the transponder snail. He was trained by a quack who died trying to save an entire country. Collateral damage isn't a number to him. It's faces. What if becoming Pirate King means walking past patients you could have saved? Here's the kicker. Not everyone is against Luffy on this. Zoro leans on the railing, eye closed, and just says, "If we stop for every weak crew, we die before reaching Laugh Tale." That's Zoro in this timeline. Loyalty to Luffy first, morality second. He remembers Kuma, Kaido, admirals, and he understands that the road to the top was never going to be clean. Robin quietly agrees. She's seen revolutions fail because they hesitated. She tells Nami, "History only remembers who wins. The rest are footnotes." It's harsh, but after Ohara, she's done pretending that kind choices always survive buster calls. Then we hit the pattern interrupt. The Den Den Mushi crackles. Live visuals of that allied crew being surrounded by marine battleships. Luffy turns away. Sanji doesn't. He lights a cigarette, storms across the deck, and grabs Luffy by the collar. "Is this still about freedom, or are you just building your own Marineford?" he demands. Jinbei steps in, voice heavy, asking if Luffy wants to become a son for the oppressed, or a new Blackbeard casting a bigger shadow. Luffy snaps back that a world where his friends are safe is worth any sacrifice. He talks about Ace, about Sabo, about losing too much by being weak. But when Sanji asks, "Safe for who exactly?" Luffy hesitates. He can't answer. You see it? His heart is still that kid from Fuchsia Village, but his tactics are something far darker. By nightfall, the Sunny cuts through calm seas under a single flag. No one is laughing. No party. No feast. Just the creak of wood and the quiet question hanging over every straw hat. How far are they willing to follow their captain down this path? And what happens when someone finally says no? Dragon, Sabo, and the revolutionaries. Ally or enemy of the new emperor? Out on the open sea, while the Sunny sails in that eerie silence, someone else is staring into a different kind of storm. On Baltigo's replacement base, deep in some hidden fortress, Monkey D. Dragon is watching the world change in real time. Reports stack up like wanted posters on his desk. Marineford footage replayed frame by frame. Luffy using chaos the way Blackbeard once did, turning a war into an opportunity. Fishman Island treaties signed under the shadow of a Yonko flag. Dressrosa's alliance sealed not just with smiles, but with the memory of Doflamingo's terror hanging over every liberated citizen. Wano's protectorate status, where the savior also walks away as the new emperor of the samurai and the closed nation. You see the pattern Dragon sees. His son is not just sailing free anymore, he's building a network. In the original timeline, Dragon moved in the shadows while Luffy, that wild card, smashed celestial dragon symbols without ever thinking about power structures. But in this timeline, every Den Den Mushi call from the New World paints a different picture. Kingdoms bending the knee, underground brokers whispering that Straw Hat territory is safer than the world government, if you obey. And right in the middle of that ideological earthquake? Sabo. Sabo loves Luffy, that's non-negotiable. He remembers Grey Terminal, and the Celestial Dragon's ship, the fire, the promise the three brothers made. He shares Luffy's hatred for the world nobles. But what if the methods are starting to overlap with the very revolutionary tactics he's been quietly questioning? Using trauma, fear, and broken countries as leverage is textbook revolutionary playbook. And suddenly, the stories about Luffy don't sound so different. He hears about Fishman Island's people signing under the memory of Hodi's terror. He hears how Dressrosa's gladiators pledge fealty because they never want another birdcage. He hears Wano's daimyos swear loyalty while the corpses of Kaido's men are still warm. Sabo asks himself, is this freedom? Or just a better branded chain? So Dragon does something he's avoided for years. He calls for a secret meeting. No banners, no fanfare. On just a deserted sky island, clouds swirling, where father and son finally stand face to face. Not as family, as two revolutionaries with different blueprints for the world. Dragon lays it out cold. Replacing the world government with a pirate empire solves nothing. You crush the celestial dragons, create a power vacuum, and what fills it? Another tyrant with a different flag. He tells Luffy that fear is a quick tool, but a rotten foundation. Luffy fires back instantly. The world doesn't need committees right now. It needs a symbol strong enough to crush Maria Joie. He'll take the weight, he'll become that monster the celestial dragons can't ignore, and then he'll fix things later. You can hear the dangerous overconfidence, that Blackbeard-like belief that destiny itself will bend. Here's the kicker. Dragon doesn't attack. He doesn't kneel either. The revolutionaries walk away from that cloud, neither ally nor enemy. Sabo's eyes linger on Luffy longer than anyone's. Their next meeting, it won't be about hugs. It'll be about whose version of freedom survives when the final war hits. And as news of this uneasy non-agreement leaks in fragments through the underworld, everyone asks the same question. When the Revolutionary Army and the Straw Hat Empire finally collide, will the world cheer for the sun or the shadow behind it? Shanks' dilemma. Stopping the boy he once bet on. While the world argues about sun versus shadow, there's one man who can't afford to pick a side with his heart alone. Shanks. You see, in the original timeline, Rich Shanks was the carefree Yonko who laughed in a tiny East Blue bar and handed his precious straw hat to a crying kid who punched a mountain bandit. That moment was a bet on the future. A bet that Luffy would inherit Roger's will, not Rock's hunger. But what if, in this timeline, the reports drifting into his hand sound less like the next Roger, and more like a smiling Blackbeard with drums of liberation? Marineford. The first shock. Shanks hears how Luffy didn't just crash the stage. He weaponized the chaos, turned Crocodile and Buggy into tools, and left the battlefield with a following instead of scars. Then Wano. A country liberated, yes, but instantly folded into Straw Hat protection, with underground routes, weapon flows, and a shadow network that feels way too close to a proto-empire. And the Straw Hat Grand Fleet? In this timeline, it's not a goofy accident. It's a deliberate structure. A web. So when we cut to Mary Joyce and Shanks walks into that pristine room to meet the Gorosei, everything has changed. In the original timeline, that scene was a massive tease with an unknown, certain pirate. But what if, ladies and gentlemen, in this timeline, he's there to talk about two names, Blackbeard and Monkey D. Luffy. He lays it out cold. Two emperors, both carrying the D, both chasing the Pirate King title. One already using darkness, the other using freedom itself as a weapon. What happens when their ambitions collide? What happens when the world starts to worship one and fear the other? But the collateral damage looks the same? Here's the kicker. Shanks isn't snitching. He's warning. He tells the Gorosei that if they push too hard, they'll create the exact monster they fear. But if they do nothing, these two rising storms could tear the balance of the three great powers to shreds. You can feel the tension, the most trusted pirate in the world asking the most hated rulers if they understand what they're playing with. And inside, Shanks is split. He remembers Luffy crying over losing Shanks' arm. He remembers that fearless declaration to become Pirate King. He still believes that Core is real, but he's also seen how power twists even good men. Roger's smile at Laughtail, Whitebeard's face at Marineford, Odin's end. How many good intentions paved the road to hell? So Shanks makes a quiet decision. The next time he meets Luffy, it might not be a simple reunion. It might be Judgment Day for an entire era. But will he return the hat to the Pirate King? Or draw his sword against the boy he raised on stories of freedom? We end with Shanks alone on his ship, staring at that straw hat. No words, just a silent question hanging in the air. Did he pass on a beacon of hope? Or crown the world's next tyrant? And if that crown has already taken root, who's actually brave enough to knock it off? Blackbeard versus Dark Luffy. Shadow Emperors collide. And that silent question doesn't just hang over Shanks. It hangs over the entire sea. Because while the red-haired Emperor hesitates, two shadows are already moving toward each other. In the original timeline, Blackbeard rose as the chaotic usurper, while Luffy was the reckless liberator. But in this timeline, they've both climbed into the same arena as full-blown Shadow Emperors, territories, fleets, informant networks, islands that whisper their names like prayers or curses. Their clash isn't just who becomes Pirate King, it's whose blueprint for pirate rule defines the next 100 years. Freedom through controlled fear, or freedom through weaponized liberation. Here's the kicker. Blackbeard sees it. He watches reports of Straw Hat interventions and recognizes his own reflection twisted into Nika's grin. Luffy using collapsed governments to install his flag. Luffy turning ex-warlords and broken crews into vassals. So Teach does what Teach always does. He escalates. He hunts even rarer devil fruits, not just for himself, but to craft a roster of walking natural disasters. He digs deeper into Impel Down's forgotten levels. He recruits monsters that even the Marines considered unusable. And he starts playing both sides, feeding intel to the world government when it hurts Luffy, then leaking marine secrets to pirates when it hurts the Navy more. Meanwhile, Luffy's empire looks totally different on the surface. You see smiling islands, festivals, liberated slaves, fishermen who raise the Straw Hat flag as a promise that the celestial dragons won't touch them again. But what if you zoom in? Some nations are genuinely loyal, remembering the day Luffy broke their chains. Others are coerced protectorates, locked into alliances Nami negotiated and Robin sealed with blackmail. Zoro and Jinbei enforce order. Law and other allied captains run darker errands in the background. Some kings toast to Luffy's name, while secretly drafting letters to Blackbeard begging for an alternative. And then the war begins. Not with a dramatic 1-versus-1, but with a missing supply ship, a mysteriously sunken island, a Yonko affiliate crew wiped out overnight. Suddenly, the New World turns into a living chessboard. Blackbeard sabotages trade routes feeding Straw Hat territories. Luffy's side hits back by liberating Blackbeard-controlled ports and instantly flipping them into protected zones. Proxy battles explode everywhere. Heart pirates versus Blackbeard's Titanic captains, Kid's remnants raiding weapon convoys, revolutionary cells sabotaging whichever side threatens their revolution least. Pattern interrupt? The Marines don't know who to stop first. From the outside, everyone watches 2Ds drag the world into their ideological hurricane. One cloaked in literal darkness, ruling through terror and greed. The other wrapped in a twisted Nika halo. Selling freedom that still demands obedience to his flag. Newspapers can't decide who's the villain. Some call Luffy a savior, others call him a smiling tyrant. And the true 1-versus-1? That's still on the horizon, ladies and gentlemen. For now, the question the world keeps asking is way scarier. When these two finally meet head-on, will there be anything left to save? The world government's counter-move. Buster calls on freedom. And the moment the world starts asking that, the Gorosei flinch, because for the first time since Rocks, their neat little threat board doesn't make sense anymore. Blackbeard is still chaos incarnate, but what if the smiling sun god pirate starts playing the game like Teach? In the original timeline, Teach is the wild card, and Luffy is the storm you can at least predict. Reckless, loud, chasing meat and adventure. In this timeline, the Elders watch reports of islands flying the Straw Hat flag, trade routes being liberated and then taxed, and former Yonko territories suddenly kneeling to a man called Joy Boy. You see, Blackbeard is a menace to stability. Luffy is becoming a menace to the very idea of their rule. So the Gorosei quietly reshuffle the board. Blackbeard stays a catastrophic threat. But Luffy, with the Will of D, Nika's symbolism, and Blackbeard-style empire building, that's the existential threat. That's the one that can overwrite history itself. Here's the kicker. Sakazuki doesn't wait for a formal decree. As Fleet Admiral, he treats this as confirmation. Absolute justice upgrades to preemptive justice. No more isolated buster calls on rogue bases. No more pretending pirate flags are just criminal insignias. And he issues a new doctrine. Any nation flying the Straw Hat is an enemy state, full naval response, no negotiation. So suddenly, a tiny island that just asked Luffy for protection is treated like a rogue kingdom. A port town that swapped the world government banner for a Straw Hat emblem is now marked for eradication. And Akainu doesn't blink. To him, this is Marineford all over again, but on a global scale. Let's dive into the new weapons he forges for that war. We get elite anti-Haki Corps trained with Seastone tech, designed to neutralize Conqueror's users before they even draw breath. We get Devil Fruit Hunter squads, patterned off CP0 and Kuzan-style assassinations, whose only job is to track, isolate, and erase powerful fruits before Luffy can add them to his growing arsenal. And over all of it, you're a propaganda storm. Newspapers calling Luffy a tyrant with a rubber smile, radio broadcasts asking if he's any better than the celestial dragons he claims to oppose. But what happens when that narrative slams into reality on the ground? This is where it hurts, because Marines like Kobe and Smoker are the ones standing on the decks, staring down islands that actually are safer under Luffy than they were under corrupt kings or Yonko tribute. In the original timeline, they already questioned absolute justice. In this timeline, they're ordered to torch villages where crime dropped, slavery ended, and kids wear straw hats like badges of hope. So picture this. Night sky. A quiet, newly freed island. Straw Hat flag waving over a rebuilt port. And on the horizon, the glow of a full Buster Call fleet. Cannons primed, orders signed by Sakazuki himself. The transponder snails crackle. The island has minutes. Do the Straw Hats intercept and risk a full-scale war before they're ready? Or let it burn to send a terrifying message back to the world government? And if Luffy chooses the darker path, ladies and gentlemen, what does that do to the world's last hope? Because the next move he makes here doesn't just change this island, It changes what the name Joy Boy means forever. Joy Boy, Nika, and the Will of D. A darker liberation. And that's where the legend of Joy Boy stops being a promise and starts sounding like a warning. In the original timeline, Luffy awakening Nika is pure catharsis. The drums of liberation mean laughter, rubber gags, and hope exploding across Onigashima. But what if, in this timeline, and on those same drums become a battle cry the whole world learns to fear? Every time the beat starts, kingdoms don't just get saved. Regimes get toppled. Nobles vanish. Flags change overnight. You see, the sun god was always the god of liberation. Not kindness, not mercy. Liberation. So when this darker Luffy dances in Gear 5, the stories that spread aren't just about joy. They're about entire islands rising up behind that ridiculous smile and leaving nothing of the old order standing. Fishermen, slaves, child soldiers, everyone hears the rhythm and thinks, if we follow him, we can burn it all down. Here's the kicker. The ancient prophecies never promised a happy ending. The poneglyphs talk about breaking the chains of the world, but not what comes after. Robin, sitting on the sunny under a blood-red sunset, Hyde starts connecting dots that no one else wants to see. Joy Boy didn't just free people, he united them, then he ruled them. An empire of the liberated, bound not by shackles, but by devotion to one overwhelming will. In this timeline, when Robin quietly tells Luffy that the last Joy Boy's banner covered half the seas, it hits different. Because Luffy has territories now. Islands that fly the Straw Hat Jolly Roger because they're scared of what happens if they take it down. And somewhere in Maria-Joie, the Gorosei read the same ancient warnings and realize history isn't repeating. It's escalating. They uncover fragments from the Void Century describing a sun that scorched the heavens and freedom that devoured all kings. Joy Boy didn't terrify the celestial dragons just by opposing them. He terrified them because his version of freedom started looking exactly like their control, just painted in brighter colors. So they erased him, erased Nika, and built a world where no one could even imagine that kind of will returning. Luffy refuses that idea at first. Of course he does. He shouts that he's nothing like them, that he just wants his friends to be free. But what if every time he liberates a nation, he leaves behind a vacuum that only his influence can fill? What if rebel leaders swear loyalty to him, not to their own people? Suddenly, his path looks a lot closer to Blackbeard's than anyone wants to admit. And that's the brutal question this timeline forces on all of us. If the entire world is free to follow Joy Boy's will, is that really freedom? Or just a prettier version of the celestial dragon's chains? That's because the next move Luffy makes with this god's power will decide whether Nika is remembered as a savior or as the first pirate king of a smiling empire. And the world government is not going to sit back and wait to find out. Straw Hat morality breaking point. The mutiny that almost was. And the world government is not going to sit back and wait to find out. So when the counterattack finally comes, it doesn't hit Luffy on a battlefield. It hits him on a random island full of people who never asked to be part of this war. An outpost town? Kids chasing each other with wooden swords? Parents talking about the funny rubber man who beat a celestial dragon? Then a Buster Call-style bombardment suddenly lights up the sky. In the original timeline, this is where Luffy would charge in, screaming, "No plan, no hesitation." But in this timeline, he's watching the horizon and thinking like Blackbeard. Because you see, that island isn't just a target, it's bait. CP0, a Vice Admiral, and a prototype Seraphim are here to drag Gear 5 out into the open and erase the Sun God in one clean operation. Luffy reads it instantly. One island, or the entire revolution. One ship, or the chance to crush both Blackbeard and the world government later. And he does the unthinkable. Raise the anchor, we're leaving. Silence. Then Nami explodes. They're kids, Luffy, we can still get them on board. Chopper's already halfway over the railing, grabbing his medical bag, screaming that he can't just watch people burn. Sanji lights a cigarette with shaking hands and says he'll go alone if he has to. Pattern interrupt, Zoro moves. He doesn't argue, he doesn't shout. He just appears in front of them, hand on his sword, eyes colder than we've ever seen. You walk off this ship in the middle of an enemy operation. Everyone dies. You disobey the captain in a war like this? We're finished. Nami slaps him. Chopper's crying. Sanji's leg is literally on fire, ready to kick past him. And Zoro doesn't budge. Because in this timeline, he's already decided. If Luffy is going to carry the world, then Zoro is going to carry Luffy's sins. The Sunny sails away while the island burns behind them. On deck, the crew finally detonates. Nami calls Luffy a monster. Usopp yells that this is exactly what Doflamingo did to Dressrosa, using people as pieces on a board. Brook quietly asks if their Jolly Roger still means freedom. Or just a different kind of chain. Sanji spits that if this is what it takes to be Pirate King, then what if the title isn't worth it at all? Here's the kicker. Luffy doesn't defend himself. He just stands there, jaw clenched, nails digging into his palms, saying nothing while his crew tears itself apart. Zoro fires back that this is war, that enemies like Akainu and Blackbeard don't care about their feelings, that if they fall here, there will be 10 more islands burned tomorrow. Robin, of all people, backs him up with a quiet, terrifying logic. If the sun god falls here, the darkness wins everywhere else. Finally, Luffy speaks. I hate this. I hate all of this. But if I fight there, they spring the trap. They kill us. They take Nika. They win. I'm not losing you. I'm not losing the ship. I'm not losing this chance. I'll carry it, all of it, so you don't have to. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the moment the Straw Hats stay. But something breaks. They don't walk away. No one mutinies. Yet from now on, every order Luffy gives isn't just weighed against his dream. It's measured against that burning island and the shadow of Blackbeard hanging over every choice he makes. And the next time he says retreat, they're all going to wonder which side of history they're standing on. Elbaf and the Giants, testing Luffy's vision of freedom. From that burning protectorate, we jump to the land that doesn't want protecting at all. Elbaf, the island of giants, a nation where strength is law, honor is oxygen, and independence is sacred. You see, if there's any place that would spit in the face of a pirate empire, even a liberating one, it's this. In the original timeline, Elbaf is hyped as this legendary warrior culture Usopp dreams about. But in this timeline, when the Straw Hat flag starts popping up over islands like a new Yonko banner, Elbaf doesn't cheer. They take it as a challenge. Who is this rubber upstart claiming to free the world by putting his mark on it? Luffy sails in thinking this is going to be easy. Show strength, smash a Sea King, laugh with the warriors, share meat, instant alliance, right? That's how it's always worked. But what if, this time, the drums of welcome never beat? The first giant warband that meets him doesn't bow. They ask a question. Are you here to trade? Or to add Elbaf to your collection? Here's the kicker. To them, Luffy's protectorates and treaties look exactly like what they've spent centuries resisting. Whether it's a Yonko, with the world government, or a smiling sun god pirate, any outside flag is still a chain. They respect his strength, they acknowledge his legend from Marineford, but they call him what no one else has yet dared to his face, an empire builder. Then the real test hits. Elbaf is split. One faction wants to open up, to join the new age under Luffy's protection, to weaponize his reputation against the world government. Another faction would rather die than kneel to any outside name. Civil war is brewing, and both sides are begging the Straw Hats to tip the scale. If Luffy backs the pro-Straw Hat camp, he saves them, and installs a regime loyal to his flag. If he walks away, the island might tear itself apart. This is the moral trial Blackbeard would love. In his hands, it's simple. Arm one side, crush the other, take the spoils. But what if Luffy suddenly sees the trap? He realizes that if he uses his might here, Elbaf doesn't become free. It just becomes his. In their eyes, that's the world government with a different hat. For the first time, he hesitates. Zoro is ready to swing. Nami and Chopper are begging him not to play God. Usopp is torn. This is his dream island. Luffy actually considers leaving a place he could control. When has that ever happened? In the end, he fights. But not to crown a Straw Hat faction. He smashes the outside agitators, forces both sides to the same table, and says the one thing no emperor says. We're not staying. Decide your own king. No territory claim, no protectorate, just scars, respect, and a giant nation that owes him nothing. And that tiny step back from the Blackbeard path? That's the seed of something dangerous for the world government. Because if the most feared pirate alive starts questioning his own empire, what does he tear down next? Final war setup, 2 monsters, and a crumbling throne. That question, what does he tear down next, gets answered faster than anyone expects. Because the moment Luffy steps back from claiming Fishman Island, the entire world steps forward into chaos. Reverie ends like a bomb. In the original timeline, we hear about Sabo's attack and the fallout in pieces. But in this timeline, it's not whispers. It's broadcast. The Flame Emperor doesn't just strike at the Celestial Dragons, he torches their symbols, frees Kuma on screen, and shouts one name to the world, Monkey D. Luffy. Suddenly, every oppressed kingdom has 2 flags in mind when they think salvation. Or revenge. You see Alabasta's rebels painting Straw Hat Jolly Rogers over old Marine bases. Drum's successors secretly send doctors and cash to Luffy's territories. Meanwhile, ruined islands in the New World raise Blackbeard's flag, not out of loyalty, but out of raw fear. It's a split religion of piracy, those who bet on the smiling sun and those who bow to the hungry void. Here's the kicker. The world government can't play their old game anymore. In the original timeline, they could let Yonko clash, leak bounties, and let pirates call pirates. But what if the 2 most dangerous pirates alive are both aiming at the same throne and both are actively dismantling your system? The Gorosei stare at maps where red X's mark defecting kingdoms. Imu looks down at a globe where entire seas are contaminated by Straw Hat or Blackbeard influence, so they escalate. Buster calls become warm-ups. They talk about erasing whole blues. Imagine them green-lighting an adjustment to the calm belt, turning Sea Kings into living minefields just to wall off routes to Laugh-Tale. Ancient weapons stop being theoretical deterrents and start becoming real options on the table. The question in that dark chamber isn't, which pirate do we use anymore? It's, which ocean do we sacrifice? While the gods panic, Luffy's empire starts to crack. Protectorates he refused to rule still fly his flag, and that makes them targets. You've got Marine Special Units and Seraphim hitting islands like Dressrosa and Fishman Island at the exact same time Blackbeard divisions raid smaller ally harbors. And the Straw Hats are sprinting across the New World, Gear 5 drums echoing from crisis to crisis, but every victory just opens up 3 more fires. And Blackbeard, he loves it. While Luffy is busy defending people, Teach is hunting answers. He raids old Roger-era sites, kidnaps scholars who escaped O'Hara's purge, and ambushes anyone who's touched a road poneglyph. Every time Luffy diverts to save a friend, another Blackbeard ship slips into some forbidden ruin, looking for Pluton, Poseidon, or the final clue to Laugh-Tale. So all roads start to converge. Revolutionary armies marching under Sabo. Disillusioned Marines following Garp and Kuzan. Celestial dragons screaming for extermination. 2 pirates racing toward the same treasure with opposite ideas of freedom. We're not asking who wins anymore, ladies and gentlemen. As we're asking, after this final war, what kind of world is left to rule? Luffy versus Blackbeard. Ideals in the dark. And that's where it finally snaps into focus. 2 pirates, 1 treasure, 1 last battlefield where the world's lies are buried. The sky over this island is wrong. Red dusk, black thunder, and those weird drums of liberation echoing off broken stone. You see, this isn't just any island. In this timeline, the final clash happens on the Last Road, an ancient ruin that was once a kingdom from the Void Century, a place Joy Boy himself might have laughed in. The carvings on the walls look like Laugh-Tale's twin. Roger's voice feels like it's still hanging in the air, and standing in the middle of those crumbling poneglyph pillars. Luffy and Blackbeard, freedom versus freedom, darkness versus a sun that won't shut up. When Blackbeard starts laughing first. That nasty, rolling zeh-ha-ha-ha-ha that instantly makes everyone on the ships watching from offshore feel sick. He points at Luffy like he's looking in a mirror. You really think you're different, Straw Hat? You used Impel Down's chaos. You turned Marineford into your stage. You gathered monsters under your flag. What separates you from me? Here's the kicker. In the original timeline, people could hand-wave this as villain talk. But in this timeline, it hits. Because we watched Luffy make deals with Crocodile, weaponize Buggy's legend, and let whole fleets burn so his brother could escape. We watched him become an Emperor of the Shadows before he ever set foot here. Luffy fires back. He says he never enjoyed anyone suffering. He only wanted to protect his friends, to keep his crew smiling, or to make a world where nobody like Ace had to die again. But what if intention isn't enough? Blackbeard just grins wider. The sea don't care what you meant, boy. It only cares who's left standing. And then they move. Darkness erupts like a black hole, swallowing half the plaza. Gear 5 explodes in answer, stone turning to rubber, ancient towers bending and snapping back like whips. Luffy could end this fast by turning the whole ruin into a weapon, by collapsing the battlefield and burying Blackbeard's fleet along with their prisoners. He doesn't. Pattern interrupt. For the first time, Luffy hesitates not from fear, but from choice. We see chained revolutionaries, terrified kids from former Yonko territories, even Marines who defected because they believed in the Straw Hat flag. One attack would erase Blackbeard's advantage. And them. He refuses to be that guy. While Blackbeard drags civilians into his gravity to use as shields, Luffy bends reality around them, taking hits he could have dodged, redirecting his own power so the ruins crack, but the people don't. Zoro screams from the sidelines to finish it. Robin's eyes widen as she realizes Luffy is finally drawing a line. In the end, it isn't a bigger punch that wins. It's a cleaner one. A punch thrown after saying no to every shortcut that made him like Blackbeard in the first place. Nika's fist comes down, shattering the darkness and the throne Blackbeard tried to build. Luffy doesn't just defeat Blackbeard, he disproves him. To the world, and to himself. But what does a victory like that cost when the world government is still watching? The fall of the world government? Liberation? Or replacement? And that punch doesn't just echo across the battlefield, it echoes up the red line. Because while Blackbeard's throne is shattering, the real throne is already on fire. In the original timeline, the final war is this slow build. Reverie, Sabo, the revolutionaries, the Shichibukai system getting abolished. But in this timeline, Luffy's darker rise has turned the whole world into dry tinder. And that last clash with Blackbeard is the spark that finally sets Maria Joie ablaze. You see, it's not just the Straw Hats anymore. You've got Dragon's full revolutionary army marching on the Holy Land, Kuma's liberation echoing through the slave quarters, disillusioned Marines like Kuzan, and even factions under Garp throwing off their coats, and independent kingdoms, Alabasta, Dressrosa, Fishman Island, suddenly sending their own fleets on flying their own flags, all converging on the same target. The seat of the gods. The celestial dragons are dragged from their bubbles. The red line is cracking, the holy knights are falling one by one, and above it all, Luffy walks straight toward the deepest chamber, where the real secret of this world sits on an empty throne that was never empty. Imu. Or whatever you want to call the thing that has been quietly deciding who lives and who gets erased from history. In the original timeline, you'd expect a big Nika speech about dreams and freedom. But what if this Luffy doesn't waste a single word? He's walked through too much darkness, used too many Blackbeard-style moves to pretend this is some fairy tale ending. So he looks Imu dead in the eye and just says it, "Your time is over. And anyone who tries to build this again gets the same fate." No negotiation, no offer of mercy for the system itself. Gear 5 drums are pounding, the sky is laughing, and the embodiment of the old world is erased in a burst of light and shadow that instantly tells everyone watching. The age of the celestial dragons is done. Here's the kicker. Once the dust settles, the world doesn't cheer in unison. It panics. Because who's in charge now? World leaders, kings, and queens who survived Maria Joie come crawling to Luffy. Become the new center. Lead a council of nations. Be the pirate king of everything. Only you can keep the peace. Only you can stop another world government from rising. This is the exact temptation that would have completed his Blackbeard-like evolution. The perfect empire handed to him on a silver platter. But this is where his crew's resistance finally wins. Nami refuses to be the brain of a tyrant. Chopper won't be the doctor of a regime. Robin has seen too many empires burn Ohara-level bright. Zoro only follows a captain, not a king. So Luffy does something insane. He breaks his own empire, the territories that flew the Straw Hat flag for protection. He tears up the formal claims. He tells Alabasta, Dressrosa, Wano, Fishman Island, "Decide for yourselves. I'm not your boss." The Straw Hat fleet is told they're free agents, not subjects. Dragon is given no orders, only a warning. If you try to become what they were, I'll come for you too. Liberation, right? But what if tearing down the system and refusing to replace it is its own kind of rule? Because even as Luffy sails away, his legend doesn't. Kids grow up wanting Straw Hat freedom. New pirates claim to fight in his name. Governments form coalitions that secretly ask, what would Luffy allow? He walked away from the throne, but did he really let go of the world? Or did he just rewrite what chains look like? And in the next part of this timeline, we see exactly how dangerous a world with no center and a legend like Luffy can become. What if the Straw Hat flag had stayed black? Alternate endings. He walked away from the throne, but the world didn't walk away from him. And that's where things get scary, ladies and gentlemen. Because what if the Straw Hat flag had stayed black? What if Luffy didn't just flirt with Blackbeard's path but committed to it all the way to the end of the story? Let's dive into the first arc ending. In this timeline, Luffy crushes Imu, Us topples the Gorosei, and the world government shatters. The seas are cheering, the drums of liberation are deafening, and then everyone turns and asks the same question. So, what now? In the original timeline, Luffy shrugs that off. Here, he doesn't. The empty throne doesn't stay empty. He accepts it. Not as a king, but as a guarantor of freedom. The Straw Hat sees Uranus, or some ancient sky technology, and Luffy turns it into a floating fortress drifting above the Red Line. His allied fleets patrol the Blues, the New World, even the Calm Belt. No more celestial dragons, no more slave brands, but also no more unchecked pirates unless Straw Hat law allows it. Peaceful on the surface. Kids grow up under a sky watched by a smiling skull and a straw hat. Yet everything depends on one man's will not breaking. You see the problem? At the moment Luffy weakens, the moment his ideals slip, that fortress becomes a prison in the clouds. But what if the story breaks even earlier? Second ending, the mutiny never heals. When the crew challenges Luffy's Blackbeard-style decisions, this timeline snaps. Nami, Sanji, Usopp, Chopper, even Frankie walk away, choosing scattered islands over a global empire. They become wandering guardians, mini-revolutionaries defending villages from the very system Luffy is building. Zoro stays, Robin stays, Jinbei weighs the tides and sides with Luffy. Suddenly, you've got a true pirate empire. Wano as a fortress, Fishman Island as a toll gate, ex-Shichibukai and supernovas kneeling to the Straw Hat banner because resistance means annihilation. Zoro is no longer just the right hand of the Pirate King. He's the dark enforcer of Straw Hat justice. In the original timeline, their dream is freedom. In this timeline, their dream is order, wearing freedom's mask. And then there's the worst-case scenario. Luffy dies in the final war. Gear 5 burns too hot, or a Blackbeard ambush lands. He wins the battle, but loses his life. The Straw Hat Empire he built territories, fleets, loyal islands, instantly becomes the new prize of the age. Former allies split into factions. Zoro's hardline, true straw hats, revolutionary-leaning islands invoking Luffy's early ideals, opportunistic captains claiming they were his secret heirs. Suddenly the world looks a lot like the Void Century's aftermath. No Imu, no Gorosei, but a dozen warlords all screaming that they carry Luffy's will. Buster Calls are replaced by Straw Hat Purges. The D. That was supposed to break the cycle becomes the justification for a new one. Here's the kicker. All of these endings grow out of the same seed. One Luffy who is just a little more patient like Blackbeard, a crew that protests a little less, a world that begs him a little harder to stay in charge. The line between Joy Boy and Titch with better PR is razor thin. So we circle back to the core question. In any of these timelines, does the sea actually become freer? Or does power always find a way to rebuild its own chains under a different flag, even when that flag is a worn-out straw hat on a black field? And as we move into the next phase of this what if, we're going to push that question to the breaking point. Comparing canons. Why Oda needs Luffy to oppose Blackbeard? I'd not mirror him. And this is where we have to zoom out for a second, because in the original timeline, Oda is not subtle about what Luffy and Blackbeard represent. Teach is literally wrapped in darkness, wielding the Yami Yami no Mi, dragging everything into a void. Luffy? He's the guy whose final power-up is a literal sun god, a drumbeat of liberation that lights up the sky. Same ocean, same dream, completely opposite sides of the horizon. Blackbeard waits decades in Whitebeard's shadow, believing in fate, in the one fruit destined for him. Luffy charges ahead, fists first, believing that if you move, the world moves with you. One worships destiny, the other weaponizes action. But what if you start to blur that line? What if Luffy keeps the sun but adopts the shadows? Using chaos, deals, calculated cruelty like Teach while still chasing the Pirate King throne? Here's the kicker. The moment you push Luffy closer to Blackbeard, even in this timeline where Marineford goes dark, you instantly expose how fragile One Piece's hopeful message really is. Freedom sounds pure when it's just save Ace or ring the bell in Skypiea. But once Luffy starts using wars like Marineford as stepping stones, once he weaponizes people the way Teach weaponizes devil fruits, you see how fast liberation can slide into domination. How many islands get freed only to end up under a different emperor's flag? And that's why the crew matters so much. In the original timeline, the Straw Hats are Luffy's moral ballast. Nami and Chopper flinch at collateral damage. Usopp calls him out when he goes too far. And Sanji and Jinbei drag his empathy back to the surface, while Zoro and Robin keep the pragmatism, but still draw a line at outright tyranny. They're the ones who stop him from turning every fight into a conquest. But in this timeline, where he leans into Blackbeard-style opportunism, the ballast slips. Not all the time, just enough. One rush decision at Marineford, one alliance with a monster like Doflamingo, one we'll fix it later that never actually gets fixed. Oda uses Blackbeard as a walking warning label, a living mirror held up to Luffy and to us. Is the freest man on the sea inherently selfish? Is that dream always at its core about standing above everyone else? Or can it be something shared like what we see with Vivi, with Fishman Island, with Wano's liberation? So when we run this darker Marineford in a New World path, we're not just changing events, we're stress testing the title of Pirate King itself. What kind of person should ever hold that crown? And as we push forward, ladies and gentlemen, that question is about to get a lot more dangerous. Micro what-ifs, key moments that could have locked in Dark Luffy. And as that question gets more dangerous, we need to zoom in. Not on eras, on moments. Because a Luffy who feels like Blackbeard doesn't appear out of nowhere. He's forged in split-second choices where everything breaks. So let's dive into some micro what-ifs, the pressure points that could have locked Dark Luffy in forever. Start at Sabaody. In the original timeline, Kuma scatters the crew and Luffy collapses, sobbing, totally helpless. That humiliation is the wound that makes Marineford hit so hard. But what if Kuma never swung those paws? What if Kizaru was stalled, Rayleigh bailed them out, and the crew escaped together? Luffy still hates the Celestial Dragons, but he never tastes that absolute failure. Without that, does he ever feel desperate enough to justify later ruthlessness? Or does he stay closer to the carefree captain who believes sheer will is enough, instead of the one who starts thinking, I need any edge at any cost? Then impel down. In the original timeline, Blackbeard and Luffy clash for a moment, throw hands, trade a few lines about dreams, and move on. But what if Teach lingered? Imagine Blackbeard actually spelling it out. You wait for the right fruit, you use the right people, you seize the right moment. He points at the prison, at the chaos, and says, this is how you bend the world. Luffy doesn't agree, but those words sit in his head. So when Marineford erupts, he's not just acting on instinct, he's got a blueprint for weaponizing chaos, straight from the future Yonko himself. Now Marineford. Here's the kicker. In this timeline, Luffy already leans darker, cuts deals, weaponizes Buggy, uses Crocodile as a spear instead of a rival. He plays the field like a proto-Blackbeard. But what if, even after every ruthless call, Ace still dies in his arms? That's a different kind of scar. Because then Luffy can't tell himself, I went too far. He tells himself, I didn't go far enough. Saving innocents? Holding back for allies? Those become weaknesses to be carved out. From that point, vengeance isn't just a reaction to Marineford, it becomes the entire operating system. Jump to Dressrosa. In the original timeline, as the Riku family trusts Luffy, accepts his terms, and the alliance feels like liberation. But what if they refused? What if King Riku says, you're just another pirate, we won't stake our country on you? And Luffy has a choice. Walk away and let Doflamingo keep the throne, or impose his will anyway. Dark Luffy, fresh off Marineford guilt, could decide, freedom means I decide who rules. He topples Doflamingo, plants Riku back on the throne without consent, and suddenly, the Straw Hat flag is tied to forced salvation. That's one step from outright tyranny. You see, each of these tiny branches is a forge, crisis after crisis, pushing Luffy closer to Blackbeard's philosophy. The world is something you take, not something you free. And as we follow this timeline forward, ladies and gentlemen, the next moment where he applies that lesson might be the one that breaks everything. Audience reflection. Would you still follow this Luffy? So now, flip the camera around for a second. Stop watching Luffy. Imagine you're standing on the deck of the Sunny, or living in some tiny island under that jolly Straw Hat flag. How long do you ride with this darker captain before you start wondering if he still has the right to lead you? In the original timeline, Luffy's the guy who burns a world government flag for Robin, who rings Enies Lobby's bell just to tell everyone, we're free. You cheer because the enemies are obvious. CP9, Celestial Dragons, Akainu. But what if, in this timeline, he's crushing marine bases, Yonko fleets, even revolutionary cells with the same grin, because they're all just pieces on his board? Are you still yelling, let's go, Captain, when your own village becomes collateral damage for his next power play? Picture this, you're Nami, watching him turn an enemy island into a Straw Hat protectorate overnight. Taxes flow through his flag, not the world government. Pirates and ex-marines walk the streets because they fear his name. Zoro and Robin say it's necessary. Chopper looks sick. You see the food stores are full, the kids are safe, but the people are quiet. Is that freedom? Or just a new uniform on the same cage? Here's the kicker. Power fantasy is insanely seductive. It feels good when Luffy one-shots an admiral. It feels hype when he does to the Marines what they did at Marineford. We all want to see Akainu get folded. But what if every victory in this story now comes with a town wiped out? Wants to deal with someone like Doflamingo, a devil fruit user disappearing so Luffy can feed the fruit to an ally? Do you still clap, or do you flinch and keep watching anyway? Ask yourself this directly. Would you rather live in a messy, chaotic world with 100 flawed captains, or under one overwhelmingly strong pirate king who actually can stop the Celestial Dragons but demands your loyalty in return? Do you pick uncertain freedom or guaranteed safety under a man who might be one bad day away from becoming Blackbeard with a straw hat? Because that's the real tension One Piece has always played with. The series tells you to chase the sea, chase dreams, chase freedom at all costs. At the same time, it shows you what happens when Kaido, Big Mom, and Blackbeard chase their own freedom. Islands enslaved, people erased, history burned. When unchecked freedom doesn't just break chains, it swallows the weak. So this what if isn't just about Luffy going dark. It's a mirror. It's asking you. When rebellion wins, when your hero starts acting like the tyrants he replaced, at what point do you stop calling it justice and start calling it conquest? And as this timeline pushes forward, ladies and gentlemen, the next choice he makes is going to force that answer on everyone. Mini recap. From Marineford's blood to a Shadow Empire. So let's zoom out for a second, because this timeline has taken us somewhere wild. We didn't just give Luffy a scarier glare. We rebuilt Marineford, the New World, and the final war around a straw hat who thinks a lot more like Blackbeard. In the original timeline, Marineford is Luffy throwing himself at death for Ace. Fists first, brain later. But in this timeline, he walks into that plaza like a future emperor. He uses allies as shields and bargaining chips, letting Crocodile and Buggy soak up fire while he cuts deals in the middle of the bloodbath. He hesitates at the platform, not out of fear, but to read the board, forcing Sengoku, Garp, and the warlords to show their hands. And when the escape finally comes, it isn't a desperate retreat. It's a broadcast, a declaration that a new era just stepped out of the smoke, and it's wearing a straw hat. From there, everything in the New World bends around that decision. Fishman Island doesn't just get saved, it becomes a straw hat protectorate, a shield, and a toll gate to the surface. Dressrosa? No chaotic alliance this time. It's annexed, Doflamingo crushed and repurposed, the toys turned back. Dirwin, the country stamped as official straw hat territory. Wano becomes the crown jewel, a fortress state flying Luffy's flag. The Grand Fleet isn't a happy accident after a banquet. It's a roster of vassals, sworn with eyes wide open. and Whole Cake Island stops being a rescue mission that spirals into chaos and becomes a surgical raid on a rival emperor's soul and stockpile. But what if power always charges a hidden tax? You see, the relational fallout is brutal. Inside the crew, Nami and Chopper flinch at how casually Luffy gambles with innocent lives, while Zoro and Robin quietly adapt to the new doctrine. Results over comfort. Dragon and Sabo look at this rising pirate king and feel the line between revolutionary ally and future tyrant getting thinner every day. Shanks, ladies and gentlemen, is stuck in the worst dilemma of his life. Does he keep betting on the kid he once inspired, or step in before that same kid replaces the monsters Shanks spent decades holding back? And the world? The world starts whispering that the Straw Hat flag means two things at once. Salvation if you kneel, subjugation if you don't. All of it funnels into the endgame, an ideological deathmatch with Blackbeard, where both men want the same throne but argue over what freedom even means. The world government collapses under their shadow war. Celestial dragons dragged from the sky while empires rise from the rubble. And here's the kicker. At the very moment Luffy can sit on a brand new throne, he tears the whole structure down instead, dissolving his own shadow empire rather than become the final jailer. So this whole what if becomes a stress test on One Piece itself. How far can we bend Luffy toward Blackbeard before he stops being the sun god of freedom and turns into just another darkness? Where's the exact point where you, watching this timeline unfold, stop cheering and start getting scared of him? Let's dive into that final question next, because the answer says as much about us as it does about Luffy. Stitching the scenarios, how this Dark Luffy fits other what-ifs, and this is where things get wild, because this Dark Luffy isn't just a one-off experiment. He's a puzzle piece that snaps into all the other Marineford what-if timelines we've already played with. You see, every branch we touched before, Gear 5 Luffy, Awakened Ace, Raging Garp, all of them can be rerun with this ruthless mindset layered on top. In the original timeline, Gear 5 is this explosive, joyful miracle in Wano. Freedom made flesh. But what if that same power exploded at Marineford inside a Luffy who's already thinking like Blackbeard? Suddenly, the drums of liberation are echoing across a battlefield where Luffy isn't just saving Ace, he's claiming territory. In one timeline, Luffy saves everyone by smiling. In this one, he saves more people by becoming someone they're afraid of. Picture it, Gear 5. Luffy bouncing across the Marineford, turning cannons into balloons, smashing admirals into the ground. But instead of rushing to collapse once Ace is free, he orders Crocodile and Buggy to secure the plaza. He tells Ivankov to lock down escape routes. He uses fear as a shield for everyone behind him. Same power, same legend, completely changed intent. Now plug this mindset into the Ace awakening route. We already imagined Ace unlocking blue, plasma-like flames, a Logia pushed into something terrifying. But what if those awakened flames appear while Luffy is openly building an empire out of Marineford's ruins? Ace survives, looks at his little brother, and has to answer a brutal question. Does he back Luffy's dark rise, or does he become the one man on the sea who can burn down his brother's new order? Here's the kicker. In a bright timeline, awakened Ace becomes Whitebeard's true heir, a beacon. In this timeline, he might become Luffy's right hand in a Straw Hat Whitebeard hybrid fleet, or the first traitor who dares to say, "You've gone too far," and pays for it. That single choice sends the entire story in opposite directions. And then there's Garp. We already asked, what if Garp actually attacked Akainu and saved Ace at Marineford? But what if his inaction isn't just a tragedy? It's the door that let this Dark Luffy walk onto the stage at all. If Garp steps in, he doesn't just save Ace, he cuts off the trauma that pushed Luffy toward Blackbeard's methods. If he hesitates, the older generation doesn't just fail to protect the new one, they create the monster that will replace Blackbeard as the Shadow Emperor of the Sea. Pattern interrupt. What if the real villain of this timeline isn't Luffy or Blackbeard? It's Marineford itself, and everyone who chose not to change it. And we're not stopping here, ladies and gentlemen. Because once you accept a Luffy who can become this cold, suddenly other what-if questions hit way harder. What if the Straw Hats actually broke up for good at Sabaody under a captain they no longer recognized? What if Blackbeard joined the Marines, forcing this Dark Luffy to be the pirate devil the world government points at on every wanted poster? Let's dive into those future branches later. For now, we still have to answer one thing. If Luffy becomes this terrifying, are we still rooting for him, or waiting for someone to take him down? Why this what-if hurts, the cost of making Luffy realistic. And that's where this timeline really hurts, ladies and gentlemen, because if we're being honest, a lot of what Dark Luffy does here actually makes sense. In a cold, strategic way, his choices are the kind of responses you'd expect when you're staring down admirals, Yonko, and the world government all at once. Suppose you see a kid who watched Marineford burn and said, "Never again, unless I'm the one controlling the fire." In the original timeline, Luffy charges straight at Marineford with zero plan, banking everything on willpower and chaos. He gets Ace back for a moment, then loses him. The world moves on. But what if, in this timeline, he looks at what Blackbeard did, waiting decades on Whitebeard's crew, stealing the Yami Yami no Mi, hijacking the war itself, and decides that's the only way to survive? Suddenly, cutting deals with Crocodile, weaponizing Buggy's fame, even using Doflamingo's underworld roots doesn't feel evil. It feels necessary. Here's the kicker, that realism is exactly what strips away the comfort of One Piece. One Piece is a world where kindness and stubbornness can actually win, where Luffy saving Vivi, Jit refusing to abandon Nami, or punching a celestial dragon is treated as a viable way to change the story, not a suicide note. When we drag him toward Blackbeard-like pragmatism, we're pulling him out of that fairy tale and shoving him into something closer to our world's power politics. In our world, the guy who refuses to sacrifice innocence usually loses. In One Piece, Oda deliberately cheats. He bends fate so that Luffy's refusal to step on the little people is rewarded. That's not an accident. That's the series planting a flag and saying, this is a different kind of pirate era. Luffy choosing to starve rather than work for Krieg, Luffy breaking into Eni's lobby for one crewmate, Luffy not hunting devil fruit users just to stockpile power. Those are narrative choices that reject grim realism on purpose. But what if we indulge the other fantasy? Let's dive into the fan service side. Hyper-competent empire-building Luffy who hunts down strong devil fruit users, locks down territories like a Yonko, and uses fear the way Blackbeard does. On paper, it's hype. You get the mastermind alliances, the shadow ports, the Seraphim level counters way earlier. You get a Luffy who never gets blindsided by a Kainu again. And yet, as you follow him, you start missing the idiot who charges in without a plan. You miss the rubber moron who screams, "I'm Luffy, the man who'll become Pirate King," in front of 3 admirals like it's not insane. That discomfort you feel? That's proof that Oda's original balance between naivety and resolve, freedom and responsibility, is way more carefully tuned than it looks at first glance. So if this darker Luffy wins bigger, but feels wrong, what happens when the world itself starts pushing back against him? Final reflection. At what point does a hero become the monster? So when the world pushes back, here's the scary question we're left with. Do you still want this Luffy to win? Because remember how we opened this whole what if. Not Luffy saves everyone, but Luffy uses everyone. At Marineford, instead of throwing his life away for Ace, he weaponizes the war. He turns Crocodile, Buggy, even the Whitebeard pirates into chess pieces. That sounds efficient? That sounds like Blackbeard. So where do you, personally, draw the line between necessary sacrifice and unforgivable cruelty? Is it one Marine? One ally? One crewmate? In the original timeline, Luffy charges in like an idiot, and people follow him because they love that idiocy. In this timeline, he's closer to Teach. Same dream, same target, same world government in his way, but with a brain that's willing to plan 10 moves ahead and a heart that's willing to harden. That's the core tension. How much of himself does Luffy have to lose to actually win? At what point does "I'll become Pirate King" stop sounding like freedom and start sounding like a threat? Here's the kicker. Blackbeard waited decades on Whitebeard's crew just to steal one fruit. Our Dark Luffy starts doing the same kind of thing, hunting devil fruit users, taking territory, letting rumors of his brutality spread because fear keeps enemies in line. On paper, he's still chasing the same dream. But what if the only real difference left between him and Teach is how they smile when they crush someone? And then you hit the really haunting question. If the only way to truly shatter the celestial dragons, the Gorosei, Emu, all of it, is to be as ruthless as Blackbeard, is that victory even worth it? Or is the struggle itself, the refusal to cross certain lines, even when it costs Ace, costs Sabo, costs entire islands, the actual point of One Piece? Are we cheering for the end result, or for the way Luffy insists on getting there? Think about how the others would answer. Ace, who died smiling because his little brother stayed true. Does he want to be saved by a Luffy who treats Marineford like a business move? Garp, the hero of the Marines, does he punch this Luffy down for becoming exactly the monster he feared? Shanks, who bet everything on that Straw Hat? Does he still meet him at the end of the Grand Line, or try to stop him early? And Nami, who was freed from Arlong's tyranny, does she stomach watching Luffy become a new kind of Arlong for the rest of the world? You see, ladies and gentlemen, the real treasure of One Piece was never just the One Piece itself. It's that stubborn belief that you can break the system, flip the world, and still look your friends in the eye without shame. That you don't have to become Blackbeard to beat Blackbeard, and if this timeline proves anything, it's that the second that belief dies, the Pirate King crown is already cursed. Your turn. Rewrite One Piece with me. So now it's your turn to grab the helm of this cursed crown and steer it. What if we've taken Luffy right up to that Blackbeard edge? But what if you pushed him even further, or pulled him back at the last second? In the original timeline, Luffy is the guy who punches celestial dragons and declares war on the world government for a friend. In this timeline, he's the guy weighing islands like chess pieces. Where do you think he snaps? Is there a moment where you see him suddenly remember who he was and throw it all away? Or do you think, once he takes that first Blackbeard-style step, there's no going back? Let's dive into your version. Would you have left Fishman Island independent, with Luffy walking away as a dark guardian angel? Or does your Luffy slap the Straw Hat flag over it and tax the underworld roots like a Yonko, turning the symbol of freedom into a shield of fear? Yet should he have kept Wano as formal Straw Hat territory, ruling from the shadows, or cut it loose the second Kaido fell to avoid becoming another Kaido himself? Here's the kicker. Put yourself on the Sunny. At what point would you, as a Straw Hat, have mutinied? Is it when Luffy orders Jinbei to sink a refugee fleet to send a message? When he tells Robin to weaponize the Void Century secrets like Blackbeard weaponizes the Yami Yami? Or are you Zoro-coded and you never question him at all, as long as the crew survives and the dream of Pirate King stays alive? I want you to actually write this timeline with me. Drop full scenes in the comments. Imagine a quiet night where Ace somehow lives in this story, finds Dark Luffy after Marineford, and begs him to stop using Whitebeard's name as leverage. Does Luffy laugh it off? Or does that one conversation crack the mask? Or picture a showdown where a disillusioned Kobe confronts Luffy on a burning island, saying the Marines were monsters, but Luffy became worse. Do they talk? Do they fight? Does Gear 5 smile in his face or breakdown? If you want, call out specific scenes you want full breakdowns on in future videos. What if Dark Luffy invaded Dressrosa? What if he hunted devil fruit users like Blackbeard? Anything. You see, this whole Marineford project is built from your what-ifs. We've already got timelines where Ace lives, where Gear 5 erupts at Marineford, where Dragon storms the war, where Luffy dies, and Nika is stolen. The next branches come from you. And ladies and gentlemen, we're not done. Because if you think Luffy going Blackbeard mode was wild, why wait until we ask the next question? What if Garp fought Akainu to the death at Marineford and never held back at all? That's the kind of timeline that doesn't just change the war, it erases the balance of the entire world. So hit subscribe, drop your darkest or most hopeful branches in the comments, and get ready. The next Marineford that never happened is already waiting. Closing shot, the Straw Hat on the black flag. So if that Garp versus Akainu deathmatch timeline blew your mind, what do we do with this one? What do we do with a world where Luffy walked the same razor's edge as Blackbeard and didn't fall, but didn't step fully back either? We ended on the sea. The camera settles on a calm ocean at sunset. No screaming Marines, no Yonko clashes, just waves breathing in and out. And as the sky burns orange and red like the last embers of Marineford. And above that quiet water, we see it. A tattered Straw Hat flag fluttering on a lonely mast. Once, that skull and crossbones felt goofy, inviting, almost like a joke. Now, in this timeline, the brim of the hat casts a long shadow over the eyes. You can't tell if it's smiling to protect everyone, or grinning like a warning. Here's the kicker. Whitebeard's words hang over this image like another flag. You see, in the original timeline, he warned that when the One Piece is found, the world will be turned upside down. But what if that prophecy got twisted here? In this timeline, the old man's voice echoes differently. The man who finds the One Piece will either save the world or burn it. And Luffy? He walked right on the fault line between those two fates. As the wind snaps the cloth, we pull back, slowly at first, then faster. Islands slide into view beneath that Straw Hat banner. On one island, people are celebrating under fireworks, shouting Luffy's name like he's the sun itself. On another, ruined marine forts are being rebuilt by freed slaves and ex-revolutionaries, trying to believe that this new age of Straw Hat dominance is better than the last. And on a third island, the bars are quiet, the whispers louder. What happens when a pirate, who used fear like a Yonko, who made deals like Blackbeard at Marineford, decides he's done? Who fills that vacuum? We keep pulling back. We see territories Luffy seized from warlords and emperors, places where his crew argued about how far they'd gone. Zoro and Robin watching the chessboard. Nami and Chopper wondering when necessary sacrifice stopped sounding like Luffy. Everyone living under that flag now has the same question you all have. Was this freedom, or just a different cage? Finally, we cut inside one last ship. No cheering crew, no feast. Just a simple railing at the stern, or a rough, unpolished throne that never felt right. Resting there is the Straw Hat itself. Luffy has just walked away, footsteps fading down the deck. Even after ruling like a king, he still refuses to sit as one. The hat doesn't move, the ship rocks, the sea glows. In the end, the sea remembers the storms, not the excuses. Cut to black. End cards. And if you want more timelines where one decision at Marineford rewrites the entire age of pirates, you already know what to do.